Hey, everybody, how's it going? We're going to have yet another great late night chat tonight. So, yeah, let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you. We're going to have yet another great late night chat. We're going to follow our normal format that we normally use. So what that means is that you should, if you would like me to talk about any certain topic in the second half of our program, you should send me a Rumble rant on the Rumble. You should cash at me at CalebOffin22, or you should buy me a coffee. That's the way the second half of our program works, is people ask questions. Somebody named Ian already asked a question before the show even started, and they'll be the first one answered. They bought a coffee. You can do that anytime. First, my opening remarks, then the roll call, then I answer your questions. Another thing is that we are having an event in New Jersey. It's going to be very, very awesome, and it is gaining momentum. We have had new people signing up for it. Garland Nixon is now going to be there, confirmed. We're honoring some local New Jersey activists. We've had some interesting registrations. This is, really gaining some momentum. So please come to the event. It's going to be awesome. Go ahead and register on Eventbrite. It's going to be a great event. People are coming in, CPI people from around the country. We're going to have quite a shindig, a gathering with music and speeches and a full buffet and all kinds of stuff. It's going to be quite a gathering in New Jersey. So I hope to see you there. Go ahead and register if you haven't registered as of yet. And other than that, again, we are following our normal format for tonight. So that means that if you've got something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, all you need to do is send me buy me a coffee is the most preferable way, but you can also cash at me or Rumble rant me. Those are the three ways that questions are received: Rumble rants, buy me a coffee, or Cash App, but Rumble Rant is the best. So with no further ado, I will jump right into it. Venezuela. What is the Trump administration doing with regards to Venezuela? What on earth is going on? Generally, if you're going to attack a country, you don't want to give them time to prepare. But Donald Trump has been building up the military forces in the Caribbean since August. And they've been building since August. They've been shooting down boats since August. Over 83 people have been killed. They've been threatening to attack and gradually building up their forces since August. It is now December. They have not yet directly attacked Venezuelan soil. They've sunk a bunch of boats, and they've done so under false pretenses. And on top of that, the amount of troops that they have assembled are not enough to carry out an actual ground invasion to overthrow the government. So what is going on? What is going on? Now, the rumor is, what we're hearing in mainstream media, is that there are going to be strikes on Venezuela. Let's see. Let's see if there are strikes on Venezuela. I'm waiting to see. But tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the Bolivarian Revolution and where it came from, because this is really, really interesting. It's really important to what we're doing. I think if we understand the way the world is now, we have to understand where it came from, and that we're largely dealing here in the third decade of the 21st century with the aftermath of the end of the 20th century, the 1990s. 1991 is when the Soviet Union fell. The Soviet Union fell. Most of the countries that had been aligned with the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe fell in 1989. But 1991 is when the Soviet Union fell. 1993, Albania fell. You had Yugoslavia gradually deteriorating over the course of the 90s. And that was all a major setback for the forces of anti-imperialism around the world. They suffered a major setback. And what then resulted was that there was a huge amount of austerity, cuts in public spending. And this happened all across the world. Now, the place that was hit pretty hard was the former Soviet Union. They just shut down the economy of the former Soviet Union. The steel mills of the Soviet Union were purchased by American firms. All the workers, some of them had shares of stock that were given, and they all were out of work and had no jobs. So American companies would buy a share of the company, buy all the shares from the employees of the steel mill, and then they would shut it down, and there would be no steel mill. Russia's farms went out of business. Almost 80% of the Russian farms closed down at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union was like a fire sale on the economy of the Soviet Union. It was crazy. It was particularly crazy. Let's check one thing here, right? Just to be sure. Like, let's check something here. Is this? Yeah. So just to confirm, this is the real Garland Nixon in the chat. I just checked. It is the real Garland, and salute to you, sir. Looking forward to seeing you in New Jersey. That is the real Garland, folks. It is not a Garland Nixon impersonator. That is the real thing. I checked. It links back to his real YouTube channel. And we're honored to have you here, Garland, and looking forward to seeing you in New Jersey. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was like a fire sale. I mean, they just sold off the economy of Russia to the highest bidder. And they did this all across Eastern Europe. And it was just economically devastating. Naomi Klein wrote a book about this called The Shock Doctrine, which just goes into detail about the results. They had 30% unemployment. Now, 30% unemployment, that's huge. That's a huge rate of unemployment, 30%. The suicide rate was through the roof, the rate of drug addiction. It was a disaster. All kinds of people who'd had a guaranteed job, guaranteed education, guaranteed healthcare were suddenly left out to dry. And the fall of the Soviet Union was disastrous. There's another good book about it called Europe Since 1989 by Philip Thayer, right? This book also has a lot of economic details about how devastating the fall of the Soviet Union was. And in South and Central America, it was a similar process. All across South and Central America, these countries were forced to cut their public services. They were just forced to sell their economy off to the highest bidder. And in Venezuela, the cost of public transportation went through the roof. Most people in the capital city of Caracas, they didn't have cars. They relied on the buses and the train system, and the cost of it went through the roof. And there was a huge riot called the Caracazo that happened. And in Bolivia, they privatized the water. And, you could go to jail if you collected rainwater on your rooftop. And the natural gas resources were privatized, and the oil of Bolivia was privatized. And Ecuador also suffered devastating consequences. And they had a farm crisis, and people were thrown off their land. It was absolutely crazy. It was absolutely crazy what was going on. And all across South and Central America, you had a devastating economic situation, and it was a result of neoliberalism. Now, the first place that neoliberal economics was ever put into practice was in Chile. 1973, the socialist president of Salvador Allende was toppled and replaced with the dictator Augusto Pinochet. And for the first 5 years of Pinochet's government, he implemented free market economics, and it was a disaster. There was a crisis of malnutrition in the country. There were a number of people in Bolivia that became mentally retarded and mentally disabled because they have lack of food in childhood. Because as soon as Pinochet came into power, he got rid of the school milk program. He got rid of all the food subsidies. The price of food went through the roof. Kids no longer got free milk in school. And as a result, there was a crisis of malnutrition in the country. And the United Nations actually published a study on, how does it impact brain development if you're malnourished as a child? And they did a study on thousands of Chilean children that became psychologically disabled because suddenly their parents didn't have food after the coup. It was an absolute disaster, 30% unemployment. And after about 5 years, the dictator Pinochet saw the economy of Chile in shambles. And he kicked Milton Friedman out and he started nationalizing industries. And it wasn't until the mid 80s that Chile had the economic miracle. And there's a lot of lies about it. Libertarian and free market literature lies about Bolivia excessively. They say, oh, it was Pinochet that privatized everything and created the economic miracle. No, the economic miracle came a decade later, long after he had kicked out Milton Friedman, started nationalizing industries, started using the military to stabilize the economy. The idea that free market capitalism was a miracle in Chile is just bull honky. And in the 1990s, all over South and Central America, they were implementing crazy free market policies. And people had their livelihoods gotten rid of, right? People who had depended on government food subsidies didn't have them anymore. People who'd been employed in government industries lost their jobs. The cost of things like public transportation went through the roof. Food subsidies that made food affordable for people were gotten rid of. The price of food went up. It was devastating in South and Central America during the 1990s. The economy of many countries throughout that region was just devastated. Venezuela was one of those countries. There was a small group of people that did okay. They were people that were involved in the oil business because oil was run by BP and Shell and Chevron and ExxonMobil. American oil companies had full access to Venezuela's oil through the technically state-run Venezuelan oil company, but it wasn't state-run. And there were a few people at the top of Venezuelan society who were doing quite well because they were in bed with American oil companies. Most of the people in Venezuela, their living standard went down very dramatically. And so then at the same time, in Cuba, which is the center of the revolutionary anti-imperialist movements of Central and South America, in Cuba, they started having conferences. This is very interesting. In the 1990s, it was Cuba that started talking about neoliberalism. Now, this word neoliberalism gets widely used. It refers to economic policies of implementing radical free market policies, cutting food assistance, laying off government workers, getting rid of government services, right? Neoliberalism. It was Cuba that popularized that term. And they had these conferences to talk about neoliberalism. And it was the Cuban government that brought in economists from Harvard and Yale, economists from China, economists from India, economists from the African continent. And every year in Cuba, they were having these big conferences about how, as a result of the fall of the Soviet Union, neoliberalism was sweeping the world. Fidel Castro started speaking about neoliberalism was the main threat. And in the early 1990s, the communists of Latin America dramatically changed their tactics. And this is really important. It's really important to understand. But in the 70s and 80s, Cuba was designated by the American government as a state sponsor of terrorism. Why? Because in Colombia, there was a brutal US-backed military dictatorship. And so Cuba was arming a group of people called the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia to fight against the dictatorship, the FARC. And in Nicaragua, there was a brutal US-backed dictator named Somoza, and Cuba gave guns and weapons to a group of people called the Sandinistas, who eventually overthrew them in 1979. They had a revolution. And in Chile, you had Pinochet, the brutal dictator. And so in the mountains of Chile, you had indigenous people that were taking up guns to fight against the dictator Pinochet. And who gave them the guns? Cuba did. Cuba was supporting guerrilla warfare as the tactic to overthrow imperialism. And it worked. And in Nicaragua, guerrilla warfare brought the Sandinista government to power. And in El Salvador, there was a civil war that went on for quite some time. They didn't actually win. And in Colombia, you had the civil war of the FARC and the paramilitaries and drug dealers backed by the United States fighting the FARC. And in Chile and in Venezuela, you had a Maoist insurgency. And you had a lot of communist rebel groups throughout Latin America that were getting armed by Cuba to fight against military dictatorships. But the situation changed in the 1990s. After the fall of the Soviet Union, these countries all started liberalizing. Now, what does liberalizing mean? Well, in the economic sense, that meant privatizing things like crazy, selling off government-owned industries, laying off government workers, lifting tariffs and restrictions on free trade, just letting American companies come in and do whatever they wanted, getting rid of public services, etc. But also, part of liberalization was not just market liberalization, but it was also not having a military dictatorship anymore. Pinochet stepped down, and Chile started having free elections again. And in Venezuela, they moved away from having a military dictatorship, started having free elections again. And in a lot of these countries that had been brutal US-backed military dictatorships, they started having free elections again. And in the context of having free elections, but at the same time having devastating economic reforms that just devastated these countries, the communists changed their tactic. And this is important to understand. In the 1970s and 80s and 60s, all across South and Central America, you had brutal military dictatorships, but those military dictators stayed in power by handing out the goods, right? Manuel Noriega was a military dictator in Panama, and he was backed by the CIA and to fight against communism. But he came to power and he realized to stay in power, if I'm going to be the military dictatorship, people have got to like me. So he built airports and he built universities and he took care of people. And especially a lot of the military, if you were in the military, you were tight with the dictator, you got taken care of. And that's how it was in a lot of these countries. These military dictators could only stay in power by handing out the goods. And they usually did that with the military. The military would have control over big sections of the economy, and the military would hand out the goods. It would be very corrupt and nepotistic, but a lot of people that were close to the military dictatorship got taken care of. They got a good paying job. They got, a nice house, and they were taken care of. In the 1990s, liberalization involved, first of all, getting rid of the military dictatorships and having free election, having freedom. And George Soros was involved in bringing down a lot of these military dictators in Chile and other places. But also, liberalization involved bringing market reforms. And what changed is that under the new liberal governments in Venezuela and in Chile and in Colombia and places like that, you could openly hand out leaflets. You could be an activist. In Pinochet's Chile, if you were organizing protests, if you were known to be a socialist or a communist, or you were organizing protests, you disappeared and they found your dead body in the street maybe 3 days later, right? You could not organize openly. And in Venezuela, under the military dictatorship, if you were a college student, right, and you were protesting or you were organizing, you disappeared, and they might send some of your body parts to your parent as a warning, right? Your parent might get like a finger in the mail, right, or something like that, just to like let them know that you were taken care of. And that changed when the liberalization came in. Suddenly, under the liberalization, with the overthrow of the dictators, one could organize again. You could hand out leaflets for your socialist group. You could organize a labor union. You could organize openly again. It wasn't a brutal military dictatorship. But at the same time, market reforms were economically devastating people. So in this new playing field, this completely new playing field, Cuba sponsored its conferences on neoliberalism. And the communists of South and Central America changed their tactics very dramatically. And they stopped promoting guerrilla warfare and instead launched a popular front strategy against neoliberalism. And in fact, in Colombia, they no longer had the military dictatorship. The Communist Party, learning what Cuba was putting forward, said we're going to end the armed struggle. And the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, refused to give up their guns. They cut their relationship with the Communist Party. And so Cuba stopped supporting the FARC. and they stopped giving the FARC any weapons. They said, you don't have to wage armed struggle. And the fact that we now support Popular Front strategies, and they cut their support for the FARC. But in Venezuela and in Chile and in Bolivia and places like that, the communists shifted their tactic. And instead of building a movement of people in the countryside taking up guns against the government, they built a mass democratic movement against neoliberalism. And often it was not a communist movement. The communist parties were part of it, but they were just part of a bigger coalition. One really essential part of all of these coalitions was the Catholic Church. And this is very interesting. The one institution that couldn't be outlawed, right, in a military dictatorship was the church. And often the Catholic Church, which is really much a very big part of Latin American culture, the Catholic Church was a place that people organized, and priests were involved in community struggles, demanding healthcare and jobs. And so there were a lot of Catholic clergy who were very much opposed to, cuts in social services, had been opposed to the military dictatorships. A lot of Catholic priests were involved. A lot of labor unions were involved. And a lot of military people. This is also very interesting. But the military had been part of the dictatorship in these countries. But the military, in a lot of cases, you had people in the military that were very patriotic and nationalistic, right? There's a whole trend in Latin America called Peronism or Peronismo, after Juan Perón, the populist leader of Argentina. And there are left Peronists and right Peronists. And Peronismo exists throughout the region. And Hugo Chavez in the 1980s and 90s was a Peronist. He was more of a Peronist. He was against communism. He said he opposed communism. He had actually killed communists. The communists had fought like an armed struggle against the Venezuelan government. He'd been involved in putting down the armed struggle. But Hugo Chavez said he was for neither capitalism or socialism, but he was for what was best for Venezuela. And he was for Bolivarianism after Simón Bolívar, the founder, the liberator of South America, the anti-colonial fighter of South America, Simón Bolívar. And Hugo Chavez was a paratrooper, and he was a military guy, a high-ranking military guy, former paratrooper, and he was basically a pan-South American nationalist. He said, I'm not for socialism, I'm not for capitalism, and I love the military, and I love military discipline, and I'm super patriotic, and I'm super Catholic, but I hate the Yankee imperialists, and I hate what they're doing to our country. I hate neoliberalism. And when I come to power, I am going to stand up to the IMF and the World Bank, and I am going to tell them that they've got to stop these cuts in social services. He wasn't a communist, but the communists voted for him. In 2002, let me back up. 1993, Hugo Chavez, this leader of the military, the country was economically devastated as a result of neoliberal cuts, right? There were whole sections of the country that would lose electricity for weeks because they couldn't pay to maintain their power grids. Basically, the way it worked is these developing countries, they get loans from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, loans them money, development loans to build up the country. And the IMF was saying, to get your loan, your development loan, you have to cut government services. And so they would, they'd say, to get your loan this year, you have to cut all of this money from the public budget. So they would go and cut, and they'd get their loan. And the next year they'd say, all right, we're going to give you another loan, but you have to cut even more. And the IMF was demanding market liberalization, and it was devastating the country. And they didn't have electricity in many neighborhoods. The garbage wouldn't be collected because they'd laid off so many sanitation workers. It was devastating the country. And so in Venezuela, you had the Communist Party that was organizing. You had a lot of Catholic priests that were involved in community struggles. You had a lot of military people who didn't agree with it. And you had this military guy, Hugo Chavez. And Hugo Chavez, I believe it was 1993, he tried to take control of Venezuela. And he tried to carry out a military coup. And he took a section of the military, and they tried to seize the capital and establish a military dictatorship to stop the cuts in spending. And it was very much an anti-communist thing. At that point, Hugo Chavez didn't call himself a socialist or a Marxist. In fact, at that point, Hugo Chavez called himself a Bolivarian, and his hero was Juan Perón of Argentina, and he was going to carry out a nationalist coup in order to stop the cuts in public spending. And he failed, and they threw him in jail, and he went to prison for trying to organize a coup. And he spent a few years in prison for an attempted coup, and a number of people, of soldiers, were killed. There were battles, and he was in prison. But while he was in prison, he said, when I get out of prison, I'm going to run for president. And when he got out of prison, he said, all right, I tried to have a military coup. No more military coups for me. I'm going to take power legally. And in 1998, they had an election in Venezuela. And the election was not about communism, right? It was a popular front. The communists supported Hugo Chavez, but they were a small part of his coalition. There was Catholic priests. It was nationalists. It was labor unions. It was a lot of military people who wanted to stop the cuts in military spending and wanted the military of Venezuela to have more of a budget and such. And they voted for Hugo Chavez. The name of his party was the Movement for a Fifth Republic. He said, we need a new constitution because the constitution that we have is enabling corruption. And he said, I am for the third way, he called it, between capitalism or socialism, and I'm for Bolivarianism, the vision of Simón Bolívar of one united South America. That's what he ran on the election of. I am going to stop the cuts in public spending, and I am for a unified South America. And he won the election. And it was close. It was very close because they called him a dictator. They said he had tried to take power in a coup, which he had. He wore a military uniform. He gave very fiery speeches. He looked like some kind of, the image people have in their head of a dictator, right? Of a guy in a military uniform who pounds the podium and is giving a fiery speech. But a lot of people said, look, shit has gotten so bad in our country. We need a strong man to fix things. And this guy is a paratrooper, and he's built, and he's super physically fit, and he wears a uniform. And he was part black, right? And that's something that the right wing, the people that didn't like him, brought up all the time. He had about a quarter Afro-Venezuelan heritage, right? He was not light-skinned. The rich people, it's funny, in America, we talk about racism, right? And they have the one-drop rule. If you have one drop of black blood, you're black. It's not like that in Latin America, right? In Latin America, it's almost like shade, right? Like the lighter you are, the better you are. The darker you are, the more you get discriminated against. And the wealthiest people in South and Central America are very light-skinned, and the poorest people tend to be black or indigenous and very dark-skinned. And there's a lot of people that are somewhere in between. And that's a different aspect of Latin America. Racism is a bit different there in that it's more about shade, kind of, right? The lighter skinned you are, the better. The darker skinned you are. In America, you're either white or you're not. It's not like that in South and Central America. It's a little bit different, right? It's how light are you, basically. And Hugo Chavez was a very dark-skinned man. I mean, he wasn't completely dark-skinned. He wasn't completely indigenous. He wasn't completely black. But if you looked at him, he wasn't a white dude, right? He had very dark skin, comparatively speaking. And that meant a lot to people. He was one of the people. He was one of us. He wasn't one of the rich, white, military landowning aristocrats full of Spanish blood. He was one of the people. And he was part African. He was part black. He was part indigenous. And he was pretty dark-skinned. And he'd served as a rank-and-file soldier and worked his way up because he was very effective and charismatic. He won the elections. And right after he won the elections, mudslides hit Venezuela. Now, this is very interesting, but mudslides are a big problem. Venezuela is a very mountainous country, and you have a lot of poor people who live in houses that at least at that time, that didn't have, they were like huts. They were not very solidly built, right? And so if you got a lot of people living on the sides of mountains and they're living in huts, if there's heavy rain, those mudslides wipe those people out. They lose their homes, and all kinds of very poor people in the mountains of Venezuela were displaced by the mudslides. It was devastating. It was just absolutely awful. And all these people had lost their homes. But then the whole country was shocked because Hugo Chavez, the new president, got on television and he said, now is the time we've got to do something about this. He said, I am sending the military, I'm sending the army to rescue the people from the mudslides. That had never been done before in Venezuela's history. The military had never yet been used to help people in a time of disaster relief. And Hugo Chavez pulled a card from Juan Perón. That's how Juan Perón, the famous populist of Argentina, became famous. There was an earthquake in Argentina, and Juan Perón sent the army to go rescue the people from the earthquake. And Hugo Chavez had studied Juan Perón, and he said, all right, there's mudslides. And he got on TV and he said, I am sending the military to rescue the people who've been devastated by the mudslides. And the whole country was moved. They had never seen that. And also, the people in the mountains were very, very poor people who were illiterate, who were dark-skinned, who didn't have electricity in their homes. And a lot of people in the country felt like those people didn't matter. Like they didn't matter. The people didn't care about them. But here, these poor people who've lost their homes in these mudslides, the president cares about them so much, he's sending the army out to take care of them. That was a big, big deal. And at that point, he said, we need help to rescue the people from the mudslides. And so I want the people of the country to form Bolivarian circles in their neighborhoods. These were community assemblies named after Simón Bolívar, the liberator, right? And he says, I want you to form a Bolivarian circle in your neighborhood. So all over the country, people that wanted to help people that had been devastated by the mudslides, they formed Bolivarian circles. These kind of community assembly groups, kind of like the Boy Scouts or whatever, get together and talk about how to clean up the parks, get together and talk about how to be better in the neighborhood, stop crime, do community watch kind of stuff. These kind of volunteer groups that organized in the community were created, called Bolivarian circles. And after the mudslides and after the Bolivarian circles were formed, Hugo Chavez was very, very popular. He was like a president who could get shit done, right? They didn't see him as a communist, right? And he was saying at that point, he didn't believe in communism. He was for neither capitalism or socialism. He's for the third way, but he just seemed like a president who could get shit done. It was a government of action, right? They were used to what Franklin Roosevelt, my favorite American president, he used to say, the American people have had their fill of do-nothing government. Do nothing government. Now we need the government to roll up its sleeves. Well, that's what Hugo Chavez did. He rolled up his sleeves, and people were like, damn, this guy is getting shit done. There was mudslides, and he sent the army, and he organized us all into community assemblies. He was very popular, and he said, all right, I ran for office saying we need a new constitution. Let's have a referendum on a new constitution. And after that, it passed by a huge number. Everybody voted for this new constitution. They said, this guy, he knows what he's doing. He's written a new constitution. The new constitution passed. And Hugo Chavez was very popular. He was very popular because he rescued people from the mudslides, because he organized the country. He had the new constitution. But then what happened? 9/11 happened. September 11th happened. And Venezuela was one of the first countries to say, we support you, America. We condemn this act of terrorism. They were on board. But then the USA started bombing Afghanistan. And the USA was bombing Afghanistan. And Hugo Chavez had started a TV show. Imagine this. It was like a weekly TV show on Sundays that he had. It was a call-in show where he would just take calls. He was like a talk show host. He was the president. It was called Allo Presidente. And it was a show where the president would be on air on TV and people could call in and ask him questions. So they had this national television show that he did every Sunday. Well, after 9/11, he obviously condemned 9/11. He said it was horrible. But then the USA invaded Afghanistan. And so when it was time for Allo Presidente, he said, we don't support invading Afghanistan. The USA doesn't have the right to invade Afghanistan. And he held up a photograph of a child who had been killed by a U.S. bomb in Afghanistan. And he said, look, 9/11 was awful, but two wrongs don't make a right. And what Bush is doing in Afghanistan is not justified. The U.S. invasion of Afghanistan is wrong. That was a very courageous stance to take. At that point, the invasion of Afghanistan was supported by NATO. It was supported by everybody. But Hugo Chavez said, no, it's wrong. And then Hugo Chavez announced that he was appointing a member of the Communist Party to his cabinet. Why? Because the communists had campaigned for him. They had gone out and campaigned for him. The Communist Party had a lot of support in some of the very poor neighborhoods of central Caracas and some of the areas where the labor unions have been strong. And he said, look, I'm not a communist, but the Communist Party, they were part of my campaign. I am going to appoint one member of the Communist Party to my government. Big mistake. So what happened? 2002, the military overthrew the Venezuelan government. And they did it with fake news, right? They took video. You can look at what they did. It was like they had video of people shooting, and they made it look like Hugo Chavez's supporters were shooting the opposition, which they were not doing. They had fake video to make it look like the people that were supporting Hugo Chavez had been shooting in the streets, which they were not doing. And they said, "Oh, look, this guy's a crazy dictator. His people are shooting. We got to overthrow him." The military arrested him at the presidential palace. He was arrested, and they declared a new government. But the rank and file soldiers rose up because they liked Hugo Chavez, and they seized the presidential palace, and they brought him back to power. And in 2002, the coup was defeated, and Hugo Chavez was restored to his rightful place as president. And at that point, he was very, very popular, right? And he had defeated the coup, and he came back into power in 2002. And then he realized, look, even though he had not been a communist, even though he had not been an advocate of socialism, he realized that the only way he could stay in power was to build up a mass movement to support him, and that he needed a lot of friends. And so Hugo Chavez made a deal with the Cuban government to start supplying doctors to Cuba. They used Venezuelan oil money to pay Cuban doctors to come to the country and give free medical care to people in Venezuela. That was a very, very dramatic move. And then on top of that, what else did they do? They decided they were going to wipe out illiteracy in the country, and they hired Cuban literacy volunteers, and thousands of Cubans came. They paid Cuba lots of money, and Cuba sent literacy people there, and they had a campaign to wipe out illiteracy in the country. And they did it, and the United Nations gave them awards and honors for it. They wiped out illiteracy in Venezuela. There were lots of impoverished people who didn't know how to read and write, and they wiped out illiteracy in the country. It was a very, very big deal. And Hugo Chavez was very popular. And at the time, 2003, the USA invaded Iraq. And what happened was the oil prices shot through the roof, right? A major oil producing country was blown to bits and blown off the market. And so at that point, the oil prices were very high. And Hugo Chavez changed the way the state-run oil company worked. So all the oil money went into the government's budget. And with that oil money, they paved the roads all over the country, and they built healthcare clinics. They built 20 new public universities. They completely changed the country. And Hugo Chavez was wildly popular for doing that. The country changed very, very dramatically. And that is how Bolivarian socialism came to power. They changed their tactics. They changed to win, right? And this is the important thing. They changed to win. Now, Hugo Chavez was in power, and it was oil socialism, petro-socialism, right? They were using public ownership of oil to bring in lots of money for the government, and the government was using that money to build the economy. And so what happened? Hugo Chavez died. After Hugo Chavez died, Obama dropped the oil prices. In 2014, there was the very dramatic oil price drop, where Saudi Arabia was pumping oil onto the international markets and just driving the price down. It dropped below $30 a barrel of oil. And so at the same time that Hugo Chavez had died and Nicolas Maduro became his successor, at the same time, the price of oil dropped very dramatically. So the amount of state revenue that they had happened. And then the USA cranked up the sanctions. All kinds of Venezuelan government bank accounts were stolen. I mean, billions of dollars of Venezuela's money in British banks and American banks was just stolen. They made it pretty much illegal for any company to import products to Venezuela. They went out of their way to just completely devastate Venezuela's economy. And there were sanctions that made it so they couldn't import food from outside the country, and there was the oil price drop, and it just devastated the Venezuelan economy. And that's when I visited Venezuela in 2015, and I was there, and I saw what I saw in Venezuela was a lot of people were very frustrated. And what was interesting to me was that, again, there's this arrogance from people who talk about it, right? Well, they all hated communism. No, I met many people who voted for the opposition party, the Movement of a Democratic Roundtable, the MUD. And many of those people from the MOOD, they told me they were socialists. They said, we love socialism. And in fact, Henrique Capriles, who was the MOOD candidate, said he was a socialist as well. They just said they weren't anti-American. They wanted to get along with America. They accused Maduro of being corrupt. And that's an important thing, right? There's this arrogance that people, they talk about, oh, communism, social. No. Like the people in Venezuela are very solidly in favor of a planned economy and social programs and things like that. The difference was there was a feeling that when the amount of oil revenue in the country very dramatically went down, and the ability to import foreign products like toilet paper and things like that dramatically decreased, there was a feeling in the country that Maduro was not handling it right or something. That's what that was about. And I was there and I talked to people. There was not anti-communism on the streets of Venezuela. There were a lot of people that were mad at the government, and in the wealthy neighborhoods, you had anti-communism. You had, people that were, but among, most people in Venezuela, there was largely support for Maduro, or there were people that were frustrated with aspects of the way Maduro had been governing. They said they liked Hugo Chavez. They didn't like Maduro, that kind of thing. And, Venezuela was in a crisis in 2015, and things got very bad. 2015, 2016, 2017, things were very, very bad in Venezuela. But then things started to improve because of Iran, right? Iran started, bringing food to Venezuela. And Venezuela, they had to have a revolution in farming and start developing their own farming because they couldn't import food from other countries. And now Venezuela's food crisis is over. They're not having a food crisis. But the most crazy thing, though, is that the opposition that opposed Maduro went out of their way to make the food crisis worse. For example, they burned food. Right? Well, they're saying, oh, socialism's so bad, we don't have food. So why were they burning food warehouses? Right? And the opposition was violent. They strung wires across interceptions so that when a cop went by on his motorcycle, it would cut his head off. They bombed buses. They bombed universities. The opposition, there's a layer of people in Venezuela that are just violently hostile to Maduro. They're agents of imperialism. There's a layer of people in Venezuela that more or less support Maduro, or they think it's better, but, maybe he's made some mistakes or whatever. And then there's a layer of people that are very, very loyal to the revolution. And that's Venezuela right now. And right now, Venezuela has largely recovered from how things were. Things were very bad in Venezuela. 2015, 2016, 2017, things were very, very bad. One thing that happened in Venezuela in around 2014 is that all the fake leftists stopped supporting Venezuela. When Hugo Chavez was president of Venezuela, at that point, all the liberals supported Venezuela. Noam Chomsky loved Venezuela. Amy Goodman loved Venezuela. All the woke, liberal, Hugo Chavez had come to the UN and called Bush the devil. All the activist, liberal, academic people, they all loved Hugo Chavez. But 2015, when suddenly Obama was the president and Venezuela was having a hard time, that's when they all changed their minds. Jacobin magazine smeared Venezuela viciously, and all the woke liberals suddenly stopped supporting Venezuela, calling it a dictatorship, whatever. And very, very interesting. Very, very interesting, the timing, isn't it? But Venezuela pulled through. And the reason they pulled through, I saw when I was there. There is a layer of people in that country that are ready to go down fighting. They believe in the revolution. And that I was on Jamarl Thomas' show this morning, and I talked about this. Venezuela is different. It's different than the way Americans understand the left, right? That government would be considered a leftist government, yes. But abortion is illegal in Venezuela. Gay marriage is illegal in Venezuela. And the leftism is very military. It's very tied in with the military. It's very nationalistic and patriotic. And it's quite socially conservative. And a lot of the rhetoric of socialist leaders, not just Maduro, but also there's many different parties in the coalition, right? It's the Patriotic Pole, it's called. And you have the United Socialist Party, you have the Communist Party, you have the Homeland for All Party, you have the Tupac Amaro Party. There's a lot of different communist and socialist and different parties that are part of that. Their rhetoric is very Christian. They talk about the Bible a lot. They talk about the oppressed and Jesus, and it's different. It's not woke American leftism, right? It's not, your 20-year-olds with nose piercings who think all Republicans are Nazis and are obsessed with the trans issue. It's not that at all, right? Being a socialist in Venezuela is about loving your homeland, right? The name of the coalition is called the Patriotic Pole. And the most socialist or communist people in Venezuela are the military. It's the military. In fact, Maduro is a former bus driver, but Hugo Chavez was a former paratrooper. The military of Venezuela is trained in Cuba, actually gets its training in Cuba. They also have these Bolivarian militias all throughout the country, where people get their military training, and all kinds of people have guns. That's another thing. People say guns are illegal in Venezuela. That is not true. Guns are everywhere. In fact, gun violence is a little bit of a problem, right? There's, with crime and stuff, there's a little bit of gun violence, but most Venezuelans own a gun. In fact, I think it's like the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans practice private gun ownership. And they now have these militias, Bolivarian militias, that are alongside the regular army, ready to defend the country. And so I look at what's happening there, and I feel like we should learn from the Bolivarian Revolution, because they changed their tactics, because their socialism is not liberalism. It's not Western leftism. It's not burn it down, tear it down. It's not obsessed with cultural issues. It's not waging a culture war against Christianity. It's certainly not anti-Christian. It's certainly not anti-patriotic, certainly not anti-military, very nationalistic, very loving the community. And, there's some amazing stuff. Like, every kid in Venezuela gets to learn a musical instrument, right? They have a government program where every kid gets a musical instrument, a violin or a trombone or a trumpet. And you know what they play on those instruments? They play classical music. Oh my God, they're Nazis, right? Classical music, they must be Nazis, but it's true, right? There's a orchestra is taught to Venezuelan young children, and with the oil money from the government, they buy the kids instruments, and those kids learn to play Bach and Beethoven and Haydn. I mean, it's socialism in Venezuela, right? It started out as an anti-austerity coalition government, and it kind of became socialist because of attacks. It was divisions in the ruling class and a Popular Front alliance and a dramatic change in tactics, all led to Venezuela becoming a socialist, anti-imperialist state. And the socialism there it's a lot like the socialism of Cuba, the socialism of North Korea, the socialism of China. It's a socialism that is about loving the country, loving the homeland, hating the imperialist, and wanting to raise the people up and wanting to march forward, wanting the next generation of young kids to be empowered. It's not woke leftism. It's not Trotskyism. It's not synthetic woke leftism. It is like Stalin. It is real socialism, right? It is socialism in one country. It is innovationism. We call it innovationism. It is faith in humanity. It is love for humanity. It is optimistic. It is constructive. That is Venezuela's socialism, Bolivarian socialism. And that is what the United States, I guess, is going to attack. But I'm waiting for it to happen. If you're really going to attack a country, you do it quickly. You don't give them months and months to prepare, right? And also, I mean, if you're going to bomb a country, you do it quickly. You don't give them time to move everything out of everywhere. And I don't know what's going to happen. I really have no idea what's going to happen, right? And we're just going to have to wait and see. But I'll tell you that the Venezuelan people will go down fighting. And they will fight heroically to defend their revolution. And if Trump bombs Venezuela, that is going to sink his approval ratings. His approval ratings are already low. They're in the toilet. And if he bombs Venezuela, or if he tries, God forbid, a ground invasion of Venezuela, that is really going to devastate Trump's approval ratings. He better not do it. He better not do it. And you get the impression when you listen to the White House, they don't know what they're doing, right? It appears the White House wanted Maduro to come to the United States and have a face-to-face meeting with Trump. And Maduro said, I'm not going to do that because you'll arrest me because I'm wanted. You've got a warrant for my arrest. You've called me a drug dealer. And the U.S. leaders looked at that and they said, oh, yeah, that's true. They don't know what they're doing. There are some people in the Trump administration, Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, that are warmongers and are tied in with the Miami mafia, the militarist right wing. There are some people like Tulsi Gabbard that want to not use military force. There are some people who probably don't know what they want. And I think at the end of the day, Trump just wants to be popular. He just wants to be remembered as a good president. He wants to be popular. He wants to set up for Trumpism and MAGA to continue as a brand long after he's in office. I think they just don't know. I think Trump just doesn't know what he wants to do. And that's the situation we're in. So I would say now is the time to be screaming from the heavens, hands off Venezuela. But now is also the time to study what the Venezuelans have done and we need a movement like what they did in Venezuela here, a movement against austerity, a movement that is patriotic and loves the country, a movement that mobilizes people to work in their own economic interest. We don't need woke leftism. Woke leftism, synthetic left, that's the whole point of CPI. We always said out of the movement to the masses, out of the movement to the masses. We don't want to be part of the idiotic layer of U.S. society that call themselves communists. We want to build a mass movement to rescue America from globalism, imperialism. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. And Venezuela is a great model of such a government coming into being, building a mass anti-austerity movement, demanding that the government take action to help the people, right? And that coalition, an anti-monopoly coalition against the cuts and austerity, taking power and moving the country towards socialism. That's the kind of movement that we need here in America, right? Not guerrilla warfare, not people being silly, not cancel culture, not, doomsday scenarios and pessimism. We need a government of action to fight for working families. That's what we need in America. And that's what CPI has always been about. We're very much inspired by Bolivarianism, right? You look at our 4-point economic plan, public control of natural resources, mass mobilization to rebuild the country, right? Public control of banking, and economic bill of rights. Our 4-point plan is very much inspired by that kind of movement, Bolivarianism. We have understood where anti-imperialist and socialist movements are in our time. That this isn't the 1920s. This isn't the 1930s. The world has changed, and we need a serious movement to stop austerity and the attacks. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, before I end my opening remarks, I wanted to comment on another thing, just one thing. But if you are able to, if you want to ask me a question for the second half of our show, the best way to do it is buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is the best way to do it. You can also do Cash App, Caleb Maupin 22, or you can do Rumble Rants. But, I do need people to ask me questions for the second half of the show. So send any questions that you got because it's you guys who make the second half of the show fun. But before we get there, what I wanted to do was Mamdani, our mayor-elect here in New York City, gave a horrendous interview about Cuba and Venezuela. And I want to debunk this because there's just so much confusion. People think Mamdani is a communist. He is not. He is not. And, he's not. And he is absolutely nothing like Maduro. He's actually nothing like Hugo Chavez. And the people that support him are a bunch of woke, cancel culture, toxic people. Mamdani's anti-Israel. I give him credit for that. And seeing him win was a big slap in the face to the Israel lobby. And I'm happy to see that he, and Trump were able to have a civil. But Mamdani is not a communist. He is a liberal. He is a liberal. And this is Mamdani giving his take on Venezuela.
I wonder if you're reluctant to call them dictators in Cuba and Venezuela.
I'm not reluctant. I just haven't thought about them that often. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, he's not interested, right? He just doesn't think about them, right? Countries that are building socialism in Latin America, countries that are, struggling against imperialism, he doesn't think about them. Why? Because he's not like them. He's not doing the same thing. He's trying to manage capitalism with more of a welfare state. He has absolutely nothing in common with it. He doesn't think about them, right? Now, if he's a communist, you would think he would probably think about these countries a lot.
I wonder if you're reluctant to call them dictators in Cuba and Venezuela.
I'm not reluctant. I just haven't thought about them that often.
I don't think about them. Wow. There you go.
Be honest with you. I think that Maduro's government is one of repression. There's no question about it.
What does that mean, of repression? You do realize Venezuela does not have the death penalty? Venezuela does not torture people. In fact, in Venezuela, opposition people are everywhere. This guy, Juan Guaido, declared himself the president, claimed he was the rightful president, got recognition from the United States, and he walked around Venezuela and they never even arrested him. So is that repression?
So it's in Cuba.
Sorry?
And also it's happening in Cuba since 1959.
And I think that the repression that, whether we're speaking about Cuban New Yorkers or Venezuelan New Yorkers, that they have had to live through is a repression that stands in a clear contrast from what our vision is.
Yeah. So there you go. That's what he thinks. He doesn't think about them that much, and he thinks they're repressive. They're governments of repression, and he wants nothing to do with them. That right there tells you what he's all about, right? And again, Mamdani, he claims to be a Shia Muslim, but he is super pro-transgender. He is super pro-LGBT. He's super pro-abortion. I don't know how one can be a Shia Muslim and be pro-LGBT, pro-abortion, pro-gay marriage, pro-transgender education for young people. I don't know what Mamdani is, but if you think Mamdani and Venezuela are the same thing, you are wrong. And, I understand why you might think that, because American communists, support Mamdani, but American communists are pathetic and failed. And the right wing is constantly equating Mamdani with those countries, but he's not that. And actually, Tucker Carlson has been speaking up and saying that he actually admires Venezuela. He's talked about how they've moved against usury. He's talked about how Venezuela is actually somewhat socially conservative. And actually, Tucker Carlson is talking about Venezuela a bit, which is quite interesting. It's quite interesting. So that's all I can say. That's all I can say about that, is that if anyone tells you that Mamdani and Venezuela are the same, they don't know what they are talking about. Some things are true and some things are not, and they're not the same. They're not the same at all. And woke leftists in America who believe in degrowth are not the same as the people who believe in growth and building up Venezuela. Woke leftists in America who think anyone who believes in classical music is a white supremacist are not the same as the Venezuelan government that has a classical music program that it's created. Woke leftists in America who think there are too many people in the world, we need to drive down the population, are not the same as Venezuelans that are Venezuela's government that's trying to raise the population, increase living standards, and raise people up. Venezuela's government is about building and constructing. It's not about pessimism. It's not about woke left. They're just not the same. They're not the same thing. And it annoys me that on the one hand, conservatives are constantly saying they're the same thing. They're not. And it also annoys me that what passes for leftism in America is nothing like the movement that I saw up close in Venezuela. We need that kind of movement here. And that's why the Center for Political Innovation exists, is we urgently need that kind of movement, a real anti-imperialist, pro-humanity, pro-growth movement. And that is what innovationism and the Center for Political Innovation is all about. That's what we're all about. So if you got any questions for the second half of the show, please, buy me a coffee for the second half of the show, send me a question, and please come to our event coming up in New Jersey. It's going to be an absolutely awesome event. It's going to be absolutely tremendous. We're looking forward to it. It's going to be great. So you can go ahead and register on the website to be part of our upcoming event. On that note, folks, we'll do the roll call. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. and then I'll answer people's questions, and that'll be our show for tonight. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Utica, New York. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Howdy, howdy, howdy. Alex in Brazil. Maria from Wyoming. Nebraska. Very, very good. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Robert in New Jersey. Good to have you, Robert. John in Florida. John in Chicago. B.A. Baracus in California. Good to see you. 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 Carolina in California. Ed in Louisville. Huey Long from the South. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Stoke-on-Trent in Middle England. Good to be seen. Another informative show. Well, that's how I like to do them. I like to share my knowledge and know what I'm talking about, etc. Yeah, names and locations. Anybody? Names and locations. Today, my wife and I, we did take the afternoon and we went to the movies. We saw the new film Hamnet, the Shakespeare movie that just came out. It was bad. I'm going to do a full review of it for this channel, like 5 minutes or so. I'm going to do, Phil in the house. Good to see you. Phil in Brooklyn. It was not good. It was not a good movie. The last 20 minutes of the film kind of redeemed it, but it was pretty shitty. It was not a good movie, and I will do a full review of it for this channel. Tomorrow I'll walk through, the park, and I'll film myself and just tell you what I thought of the movie. Mohican D in California, Gabby in Chicago, Red Axis in Ottawa, but it just wasn't a good movie. I'll just be honest with you. It was a bit of a stinker. It was not a good film, it was really hard to get through. The final 20 minutes were redeeming and satisfying. Connor in Vancouver, but largely I wouldn't recommend it. Unfortunately, I like Shakespeare. I had an uncle who was a theater professor, I tend to like stuff about Shakespeare, but I did not particularly care for this film. It just, it didn't hit the spot for me, and you'll have to watch my video about why, right? I'm going to go film a movie review of it and tell you why I didn't like it. Not going to tell you tonight. But if you have any questions, right? Any more questions want to come in for the second half of the show, best way to do it is buy me a coffee. I thought for tonight, while I'm waiting for you all to send questions for me to answer for the second half of the show, what I might do is put on some music by Dean Reed. Do you guys know Dean Reed? Dean Reed was the Red Elvis. And Dean Reed was an American country singer who absolutely bombed in the United States. People didn't like him, but his albums sold in Argentina and Chile. So he moved to Argentina and Chile, and he lived in Chile when the coup happened. And he was part of the communist movement in Chile until the Pinochet coup happened. And then he started touring the Eastern Bloc, and he was the Red Elvis, the man who brought rock and roll music to the Eastern Bloc. His name was Dean Reed. And he died in East Germany during the 1980s. And he was they called him the Red Elvis. He was the guy who played American music for the Soviet audiences. So I got a couple Dean Reed songs to play for you tonight. This is Dean Reed. I think he was born in Colorado, but he became a rock and roll star in communist countries, mainly in the Eastern European, communist bloc, but also in Latin America and elsewhere. So this is Venceremos.
Desde el hondo crisol de la patria se levanta el clamor popular, ya se anuncia la nueva alborada, todo Chile comienza a cantar, recordando el soldado valiente, cuyo ejemplo se hiciera inmortal. Enfrentemos primero la muerte, traicionar a la patria más. Venceremos, venceremos, de gloria. Socialista será el porvenir, todos juntos haremos la historia, a cumplir, a cumplir, a cumplir. Venceremos, venceremos, que cadenas habrá que romper. Venceremos, venceremos, al fascismo sabremos vencer.
That song, Venceremos, that was a campaign song for Salvador Allende, the socialist president of Chile, who was overthrown by the CIA in 1973. Very brutal, U.S. coup, very horrible. But that was written by Victor Jara, who was kind of the folk singer of the Latin American, of the Chilean anti-imperialist, movement. So yes, means we will prevail. But Dean Reed also just performed regular American songs. This is an American blues song that he performed called Kansas City. And this is him riding around, I think, Moscow, or I don't know what city it is, but he's riding around on his motorcycle, and it's his version of the song Kansas City, which is an American blues song that goes back pretty far. So here we go.
I'm going to Kansas City. Kansas City, here I come. Here I come, here I come, here I come. I'm going to Kansas City. Kansas City, here I come. Here I come, here I come, here I come. They got some crazy little women there, and I'm gonna get me one. I'm gonna be staying on the corner, 12th Street and Vine. I'm gonna be staying on the corner, 12th Street and Vine. With my Kansas City baby and a bottle of Kansas City wine. Well, I might take a train, I might take a plane, but if I'm to walk, I'm going just the same. I'm going to Kansas City, Kansas City, here I come. Here I come, here I come, here I come. They got some crazy little women there, and I'm gonna get me one. Take it away, yeah. I'm going to Kansas City, Kansas City, here I come. Here I come, here I come, here I come. They got some crazy little women there, and I'm gonna get me one. Yeah, they got some crazy little women there, and I'm gonna get me one. Yeah, they got some crazy little women there, and I'm gonna get me one.
Yeah, that's Dean Reed, the Red Elvis, performing there. Yeah, if anyone has any more questions, by all means, buy me a coffee is the best way to send them. You can send them afterwards if you'd like. I did want to play one more Dean Reed song. This is another song. This is a communist song, a Latin American communist song that he sings in both Spanish and English, called "We Are Revolutionaries." And I guess, where is it? Kansas City, Venceremos. Where is? I think it's called "We Are Revolutionaries" or "Somos los Revolucionarios." So let me see where did I put the file? Okay, I thought I had downloaded that song already. That's weird. Yeah, all right, well, let me download "We Are Revolutionaries." We'll play "Somos los Revolucionarios." and that's another Dean Reed song. And then I'll start answering questions. So let me just put that on. That's another favorite of mine, of Dean Reed, Somos Los Revolucionarios. It's pretty classic. But yeah, I thought I'd already downloaded that. What the heck, right? Where's the video? But you know how these things work. You get distracted or whatever. Right? So hold on. We are revolutionaries. Well, now I can't even find the vid. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Okay. All right. We got the video. All right. Yeah. So, well, maybe hold on. Maybe I already downloaded it. Hold on. Maybe it's. No. All right. Okay. Well, I just got to download the video. I got the video. This is another Dean Reed song called Somos Los Revolucionarios. We'll put that on. And then after that, I'll start answering questions. So yeah, send me some questions, folks. Yeah, should be good. Dean Reed. All right, here we go. All right, this is another Dean Reed song. We Are Revolutionaries by Dean Reed. We are revolutionaries.
Somos los revolucionarios, queremos la justicia y la libertad. Somos los revolucionarios, defenderemos siempre la paz y la humanidad. La montaña luchando está, la pradera era feliz, que bajemos a la ciudad, trayendo la libertad. Los muchachos sonreirán, y las filas han de marchar, y la gente saludará cuando nos vean pasar. We are revolutionaries, and we'll fight for justice and liberty today. Oh, we are revolutionaries, and we'll win the battle. It's what the people say. Our destiny. Ho Chi Minh and Castro too have made the whole world see that our fight is all the same, whether black or Asian or white. And as the days will come, all good people must fight. Somos revolucionarios, queremos la justicia y la libertad. Somos los revolucionarios, defenderemos siempre la paz y la humanidad.
All right. And while we're at it, Maduro, they're trying to make it look like, oh, he's afraid, he's in hiding. He is not. And in fact, Maduro has been having big rallies with all the people that support the revolution in Venezuela. And he's been dancing and showing joy as the people rally to defend their country. This is Maduro dancing. Yeah, what a better statement, you know? That's a great way to just say, look, we're fighting. We are not going to surrender. That is awesome. That is absolutely awesome. All right. So the first question we've got, it's from Ian. And Ian asked me what I think. I'll just read his whole thing. He said, "Hey, I'm curious. If you have anything to say about the movie There Will Be Blood? I love listening, and among the fun stuff, the movie talks are some of my favorite." Well, thank you. And I'm about to do another movie review tomorrow. And I'm going to do anyway. So, yeah, I have not seen There Will Be Blood. I know There Will Be Blood is based on a novel by Upton Sinclair, right? Upton Sinclair is like a socialist novelist who wrote a number of different novels that were very popular in American history. He wrote The Jungle, which I did read, which is about Lithuanian immigrants who work in the meatpacking industry and join the Socialist Party. And go on strike and are involved in unions and such. And he wrote a number of different pieces, Upton Sinclair. And Upton Sinclair was never a Communist Party member, but he did defend the Soviet Union around the Moscow trials. And, Upton Sinclair was an important American leftist novelist. And the fact that they took one of his novels about oil tycoons, right? And they made it into a Hollywood movie. It's something I should see, right? Mariah says it's an excellent movie, one of the best Daniel Day-Lewis did. You should definitely watch it. Well, I will put it on my list. I will definitely put it on my list. And thank you, Ian, for your very insightful question. And if anyone else has any other questions, buy me a coffee is the best way to send them. We do have a couple, I think one other question that came in via Rumble. And it was from Penny. And Penny said, "What do you think of Mexico suing U.S. gun shops for trafficking guns to Mexico?" And 2, Petro claimed in an interview that he knows the USA wants Venezuelan oil, but Venezuela is not a democracy. What's up with that? Okay, so I will answer both of those things. As far as suing the gun shops in America, I don't know the specifics, but if that gun shop broke the law, broke Mexican law to smuggle guns into Mexico, right? They committed a crime, right? And that's a crime, right? If you illegally sell a gun, you can be held liable for the murders, right? If you sell a gun with a license, and someone takes that gun and makes their own decision with it, that's different. But if you are trafficking illegal firearms, right? And someone then takes that illegal firearm in the United States, you can actually be held liable in like 3rd degree, 4th degree murder. So, if these gun shops were intentionally breaking Mexican law, then I would see that as that's totally fair game. However, if it's not the case, I would think that's kind of dumb, right? U.S. law enforcement and the U.S. government sends lots of guns to Mexico just as gifts. If anything, this sounds like the Mexican government, that is at odds with Trump to some degree or other, that faced a color revolution attempt. This sounds like them pandering to the Democrats, the liberals, who very much gun control is one of their issues. They hate the NRA, which is a big fundraiser for Republicans. I will say the gun issue is a very strange one. First of all, I am not largely in favor of gun control. The tradition that I come out of has always seen gun control as a mechanism of weakening the people, right? Where the first gun law that ever came to existence in the United States was in Louisiana, and it was that no formerly enslaved person may ever own a gun. Now that right there tells you what gun control is about, right? There weren't new gun control laws until the 1970s when the Black Panthers came in. And suddenly there was a big push to disarm people. And Ronald Reagan was a huge supporter. It was Ronald Reagan who was trying to pass gun control laws to disarm the Black Panthers in the 1960s. The gun control argument as we currently have it comes out of the culture war of the late Cold War, where the left are associated with pacifism and liberals. And so guns are associated with being a man and being masculine. So of course it's conservatives that love their guns. It's liberals who don't. But I am largely not in favor of getting up the Second Amendment because I don't trust the American government. And guns, labor unions have historically defended their picket lines with guns. The black people have taken up arms and defended themselves. And that the idea that we should want the American government to disarm people, I don't think that's a good idea. That said, I do understand that the school shooting stuff is not the same. That's not the same thing. All right. The school shooting thing is not a matter of, young people of political violence. The school shooting thing is mentally ill people, who get their hands on a gun somehow and go on a merciless killing spree of their classmates. And that's something that a lot of parents are very afraid of. And I understand their fear. I would believe that the culture of the United States is to blame for that, not the guns just being there. Right. That's my issue there. I do believe mass shootings are a current incarnation of the Atlanticist pathology. So there's that. Now, the second part of your question, Penny, was Petro claimed in an interview that he knows the USA wants Venezuela's oil. Venezuela is not a democracy. I don't trust Petro. I'll be honest. I don't trust him. I don't. I listened to his speech at the UN when he first got in, his first UN General Assembly speech. It was horrible. It was all about how growth is bad, right? And that capitalism is bad because it just wants more and more. It just wants more growth, and that's bad for the environment. Puke. That's not my beliefs at all. Second, I also don't like that. And then after that, he then started ranting about how important drugs are. And, drugs are amazing. Who cares if people use drugs? And, the war on drugs doesn't do any good. We ought to just legalize drugs. And it's like Colombia. There's a big problem with cocaine traffickers and all of that in Colombia. And so for him to get up there and say, hey, drugs aren't so bad, I understand that drugs shouldn't be criminalized. I don't think people should be imprisoned for using drugs, but drugs are very bad. I do think drugs are bad, right? I just don't think it should be criminal. I think it should be treated as a medical issue. People who have a drug problem, need to get treatment and all that. They shouldn't be penalized and locked in jail. It doesn't help. But that said, drugs are not good. Drug culture is not good. Drug addiction is not good, right? That's my feeling. I know that we all have our vices. I'm addicted to Diet Coke. It's probably very bad for my liver, and I need that caffeine high, and it's not healthy. And, there are many people who can drink responsibly, and I drank responsibly. I just don't particularly, it just dries me out. It dries me out. So I just don't do it, right? It makes my face super red, and I either get a headache right then or the next day. So I don't do it. I've never smoked weed, but I know there are people who casually smoke weed, and it's not the end of the world. They're able to be okay with that. But that said, I don't think it's healthy to have political organizations where people are always getting fucked up together. I don't think drugs of any kind, legal or illegal, recreational drugs, alcohol, weed, has a place in revolutionary activities, right? If you're going to drink responsibly, do it on your own time. Don't do it in the revolutionary movement. Same with smoking weed. You can smoke weed if you want to. If it's legal, it's not my business. But don't bring weed to the events and smoke it with other people. It doesn't have a place in the movement. And that getting fucked up is generally, I don't view it as something that should be encouraged in any way. Just because, you're not in your right mind, right? If sometime you need to relax and drink or you need to smoke, that's your business, but I don't think it's something we should be going around saying, all right, go get drunk. Woo. I don't think we should do that. I don't think we should be going around saying, all right, go get high. I don't think we should do that. Right. It's just not, while it shouldn't be illegal, and while there are people I know who do it responsibly and it's not a problem, they're not addicts or whatever, I just don't think it's the kind of thing we should just go around. I just don't think it's, healthy to have a society where we're encouraging people to get fucked up all the time. That's just my personal opinion. And maybe it's because my mother's family, they don't drink at all. My father's family, they drink, but my mother's family, I'm from an Irish Protestants. That's my heritage, right? On both sides, right? It's bright red hair and got a French last name because my ancestors were Huguenots. The Huguenots were kicked out of France for being Protestant. They moved to Northern Ireland, and the British used them to kick around the Irish Catholics. And it's just, my mother's family's culture was don't drink, right? My dad's family's culture was they drank a little bit, and I just, for whatever reason, when I got to the point that I was old enough, when I was in college, I remember I used to work at a fast food restaurant when I was in college. And after work, sometimes I'd go to the bar across the street and drink a beer. Sometimes, and I liked it, I guess, but, it wasn't something that I really cared that much about. And And so it got to the point after I'd been in New York for a little while. I've told the story many times. I went to the movies with my wife. There's a movie theater here in Brooklyn where they have alcohol in the movie theater. I ordered a glass of white wine. The credits of the movie came up. I took the first sip and my head started hurting. And the whole movie, I had a horrendous headache. And from then on, I said, no more alcohol. There's been a couple times I've been in Russia hanging out with people. I'll take a shot, vodka, whatever, But now in Russia, they don't really do that. Now in Russia, they're more about beer and wine. They don't do the vodka thing in Russia as much anymore. But there's been times when I was first going to Russia where I'd be out with people. Yeah, I drink a shot of vodka here. But honestly, I don't, it's just not, what I think people should do. Now, the second, but anyway, yeah. So I've never trusted Petro. I'll be honest. I'm glad he's standing in solidarity with Venezuela. I appreciate that. I'm glad he's doing that. And I didn't expect him to do that. And I wonder if he would be doing that if Trump was not the president. But that said, I'm glad he's standing in solidarity with Venezuela. His brand of politics has never been mine. Now, Dan Kovalik, he has a whole history of working with leftists in Colombia to sue Coca-Cola and stuff. And so he knows Petro, and and Dan Kovalik is someone I really respect and look up to, a great writer, a great lawyer. I mean, who knows? But, I'm just telling you, that's my reaction. Now, we've had another question from Gabby. Gabby said, is starting a small business a scam in today's economy? Interesting. Countries like Russia and China support local shops way better. I'd love to open one day and treat my workers good and pay them well. Well, I will say small business owners have a really tough time in this economy, right? And the banks rip them off, and the regulations are written in a way that crushes them, and small business owners have a tough time. Is it a scam? I don't know. I will say multi-level marketing is a really big thing now, and it is a scam, right? And it's unfortunate because a lot of people really need to make money. And, I mean, when I was looking for jobs years ago, I looked for jobs, and so many of the jobs I looked for were not jobs. They were multi-level marketing scams. And I would get there and they'd be like, oh, wow, we want to hire you. We're a real company. So we need you to give us $200 and then we'll give you the products. And it's like, okay, not a real job. Moving on. And there was a lot of things like that, and that's disappointing. And they often present it as starting a small business. That's not what it is. And it's unfortunate. And, it is what it is. So, I will say though, that there's now that in addition, there are a lot of multi-level marketing stuff that goes on, number one. But now there's also so much like awareness about multi-level marketing. A lot of stuff gets called multi-level marketing that's not multi-level marketing. For example, the RCP, the Revolutionary Communist Party, that's a Maoist communist group. I have criticisms of them. I wrote a whole book, Letter to Bob Avakian, critiquing their line. But one thing they are not is a multi-level marketing scam. They sell newspapers to raise money for their group. They sell books, to pay for the books. But but in the cult awareness people that are going after them, calling them a cult, they claim they're a multi-level marketing scheme. They are not that. A multi-level marketing scheme, Amway, there's a lot of like women's cosmetics companies and stuff, but the Revolutionary Communist Party is not a multi-level marketing scam, and that's just ridiculous, right? And that there's all these YouTube channels that call everything a multi-level marketing scam. They called Jimmy Dore a multi-level marketing scam because he had t-shirts on his website. And they're like, oh, he sells t-shirts. It's just a multi-level marketing scam. No, it's not. Maybe he wants to make money from having t-shirts on his website. Like, and that there is this, and that's one thing that the great Peter Coffin, who I really look up to, that's one thing he's talked a lot about, is that there's this culture now of everything's a scam. And like people are all looking for a way for things to be a scam, and it's like, well, scams do exist, right? And they suck and they're awful, but everything in which, somebody gains is not a scam, right? A job is not a scam. You could argue that it kind of is, right? If you're working in a factory, you're getting paid, you're not getting the full value of your labor. That's what Marx wrote about. But is that a scam? No, it's called wage labor, right? You are getting paid. You get more money than you came with, right? You're getting paid, right? So, is like, I mean, are we going to call jobs scams now? I mean, it's not fair. You don't get paid the full value of your labor. Your employer gets money for just being your employer. It's not fair, but it's like, it's not a scam, right? If you if you have to pay money to do the job, right, maybe that's a scam. But it's like everything that is unfair, everything in which somebody gains is not a scam. And that we need to get past this culture of, it's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. It's all a cookbook. And it's just, it gets a little old after a while, right? Anyway, I could talk more and more about this, but yes, multi-level marketing exists, and it's unfortunate because, I remember when I first moved to New York, I was looking for jobs, and I would find a job and I would go to the interview, and then the person would be like, "Oh, wow, we're a real company. We are totally real. We're a real marketing job, and you have to pay us money." I'm like, "No, you're not a real marketing job. Goodbye." It was shameful. Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff like that, unfortunately, So, and there are people that make it work, multi-level marketing, but for it to work, there have to be a lot of people who, the reason multi-level marketing is considered to be not legit is because in order for somebody to make money at it, there have to be a lot of other people who lose money in it. And that's, you're not making money selling the products. You're making money convincing people they will make money selling the products, and they don't make any money. And that's the only way it can be profitable. And so that raises very serious ethical questions, right? If you have a job selling fashion products, fine, right? If you have a job selling anything, fine, right? But if your job is predicated not on actually selling the products, but on convincing other people to sell the products, and they don't, that's the problem, right? Convincing other people to spend their own money to buy products that they're not actually going to sell, like that's where it raises the concern. Okay, that's the issue there, right? So all right, okay, now Gabby, I already answered Gabby's question. So the next question is John bought a coffee, and he said President Maduro should challenge Trump or Rubio to a dance contest, a dance off, like in Guardians of the Galaxy. Well, there you go. I saw the first Guardians of the Galaxy, right? And I liked it. It was kind of fun. Right. It was the I am Groot, the like plant. And, I saw the first Guardians of the Galaxy, and I enjoyed it. It was kind of a humorous break from your typical Marvel movie. I actually did enjoy it. It was fun. And I think I might have even seen the second one. I just don't remember a dance competition exactly. Right. I really don't remember a dance competition, but it was a fun movie. I remember I Am Groot, and I remember the kid who's got a Walkman from the 1980s with a bunch of 1980s songs on it with mixtapes, and that's about all I remember. I don't remember that much of it, honestly, but it was I remember I had fun. That's what I remember. That's what I like in a movie. If I can have fun, I like it. And that's, the movie I saw today didn't really have fun until the last 20 minutes. The last 20 minutes were okay. But the first 3/4 of the movie were really hard to sit through, and it was not what I came to the movie to see. As somebody who came to a movie about Shakespeare, I did not come to sit through what I sat through. But I won't ruin it. I won't give my review on here. I will save my review for a future. I'm going to make a video tomorrow, actually, so I will make a video review of the film, a short video review of the movie that I saw today with my wife. I'm glad I went, and the last 20 minutes were satisfying, but nah. Thumbs down. Killian, I wonder if Killian's watching. He's someone who's been around CPI, and he actually knows a lot about Shakespeare and stuff. So I wonder what he would think of the movie. Yeah. But anyway, I guess I don't want to say too much more about it. Come to our event in New Jersey. It's gaining momentum. I saw the movie Hamnet, the new Shakespeare movie, Hamnet, with my wife. I'm going to make a movie review of it, a video review of it for the YouTube channel tomorrow. But yes, come to our event in New Jersey. It's going to be awesome. And join the Center for Political Innovation. People are joining. If you have just joined CPI, shout out to any of the new subscribe or new members that if you just joined, make sure to check your email on Friday and Saturday and check your spam folder for the invitation to the weekly meeting. You have to come to a weekly meeting, at the weekly meeting. You'll meet other people in CPI, then we can add you to the active members chat and all that. But you have to come to a weekly meeting to get kind of plugged into CPI. That's the first step. So once you've joined, you'll get invited to the weekly meeting, and then we can plug you in. And if you're a new member, we've had a couple new members recently, and they're great. Shout out to them. We're an expanding organization. We have something that people want. We have a message that people want. We have something that people are looking for. So join the Center for Political Innovation. Come to our event in New Jersey. A lot of exciting stuff is planned. Now, a couple more questions have actually come in. Did you inhale? LOL, just kidding. No, I never had to, a joint in my hand. Better question, was Black Lives Matter a scam? I know Russia was skeptical, but had people who supported it. Somebody we don't talk about anymore talked about it once. Look, you can go to the website of CPI and you can see an article we just did about how I video recorded an act of police brutality in 2010 before it was trendy, at least among white people, to talk about police brutality. And you can't say there wasn't an issue and that there still isn't an issue with police brutality. There is. Okay. So I am not one to say that, the message of Black Lives Matter was that, all kinds of people who are Black are wrongfully killed by law enforcement. Right. And that is not wrong. That is true. That said, I do believe the George Floyd thing was very much, they wanted to create an atmosphere where Trump could be removed. But I think the issue is real. And Chairman O'Malley pointed out there was no demand. It was just a whine. It was just kind of, we're really angry and we're going to go out and burn stuff and be really angry. And that the criticism that Elaine Brown and others had of it was that it wasn't, they weren't demanding real changes to the system. Defund the police was not a serious demand. Abolish the police is really not a serious demand. It was just kind of, police brutality exists, racism exists, and that's not the basis of a real movement. And it was, I talked about on the previous stream where I talked about how Obama, he started, using like the Gina 6 case and then the Trayvon Martin case. And it was part of Obama's social media strategy. And, ultimately, Black people are an oppressed nation within U.S. borders. They are a colonized people. As a colonized people, they have the right to integrate if they choose or separate if they choose. At this time, there is not a movement for separation among Black people. So as a white person, I'm not going to be advocating that. Right now, the majority of Black people seem to want a place in our country. And so I will fight for their right to attend universities, to be hired at white-owned companies, to start their own businesses. Right now, that seems to be largely what the Black community wants, is a place in white society. That said, there is a very large minority of Black people that are Black nationalists that do want to separate, and they want to have their own territory. They want to create Black businesses and Black community empowerment, and I respect that. I have a huge amount of respect for the Nation of Islam. I have a huge amount of respect for Chairman O'Malley and the African People's Socialist Party and the Black Power Blueprint. I know they're having an important telethon tomorrow, actually, a telethon event that our member John McCarthy recorded a video for, which, shout out to John. It's a great video. I showed it on the last stream that I did. The issue of racism, it is part of America, and it's something we have to deal with. But the way to deal with it is not virtue signaling. It's changing conditions, and largely it's dealing with economic issues. And the best cure for racism in American history has always been the picket line. People coming together to see their common economic interest against the bosses. That has always been the main way that racism has been opposed in the United States. And so this idea that we can't talk about economics because if you do, that's racist, that's class reductionist, that's just wrong. So I don't think Black Lives Matter was a scam necessarily, but it was something that became useful to liberals. Now, Leo Messi said, is this person okay? Right? I don't know what that means. Is this person okay? You sent me a video of somebody yelling about immigration, and about the recent shooting. Well, look, Here's the thing about the recent shooting. I just want to say, the guy was not an undocumented worker. He was a legal immigrant. He got a visa. Why did he get a visa? Because he worked with the CIA in Afghanistan. He was a terrorist, a Wahhabi terrorist and extremist. And the CIA worked with him, and he worked with a CIA fighting squad in Afghanistan. And he did such a good job, they gave him a visa. And the same with the Tsarnaev brothers' parents. The Tsarnaev brothers' parents were Chechens who were fighting against Russia. And they did such a good job. They got a visa. They came here. They had 2 kids, and those kids blew up the Boston Marathon. And the concert in Manchester that was blown up. Who blew it up? A Libyan guy. And that Libyan guy, his dad had fought against Gaddafi and gotten a visa from the British government. And then he and the bomber himself went to Libya and fought against Gaddafi. And then they went back to Britain and they blew up the concert. The issue is not immigrants are bad. The issue is the U.S. government and the CIA work with terrorists all over the world and give them visas. That's the issue. And it drives me crazy. No one ever points this out, right? And it's like they don't get the people we reward with visas and the people who blow us up and kill us at the Boston bombing, people who shot the soldiers in D.C., the Manchester bombing in Britain. They're the people that the American government works for. So that's not an argument against Maduro. That's not an argument against Iran. Iran doesn't do that. The people who the American government arms and trains, they're the ones who do it. Not an argument against Russia. It's an argument against the Chechen separatists that the American government funds. And it just drives me crazy. Why was it not all over the news after the Manchester bombing that kid had fought Gaddafi? Why not? Because that's what the people fighting Gaddafi did against Gaddafi. They blew up people. They killed people. They were terrorists. But I guess, it just frustrates me. The U.S. government goes all over the world funding terrorists. And sometimes some of these terrorists do such a good job, we give them a visa, and they come to America and they do terrorism because that's what terrorists do. And then the response is, oh, we got to deport undocumented people. Undocumented people didn't get visas. That's why they're undocumented. That has nothing to do with anything. So, I don't know. It pisses me off. It annoys me. And it's like right in front of your face. The U.S. government goes all over the world arming terrorists. And we give terrorist visas. And they come here and they do terrorist shit. And that doesn't say anything about anti-imperialist countries. It doesn't say anything about undocumented workers. It says something about the CIA and their policy of arming Islamic terrorists. It's that simple. All right. Next question. Leo Messi. It's from Penny. Penny sent a question in. She said, a funny video about the Maduro reward. All right, we'll put that on. Just let me download the funny video about the Maduro reward. All right, we'll put it on. And we're probably going to end this stream because I don't think there's any more questions that have come in. If anyone has any more questions, I guess you can send them in. Join CPI. We're a growing organization doing great shit, doing great stuff. And on top of that, we're about to have a great event in New Jersey. It's going to be pretty awesome. But here we go. This is the funny video that Penny. Here we go. That's funny. You can do a lot with AI now, can't you? That's hilarious. No, that was a good video. That was great. I love it. That was good. That was clever. Hey, AI is great for videos now, man. You can do all kinds of stuff. But we have been saying hands off Venezuela and CPI like crazy. The LA folks have been out in the streets of LA. This is them just a couple weekends ago. They were hitting the streets in Venice Beach and in downtown LA and other places. We disrupted the No Kings rallies around the country to say hands off Venezuela. We have been with Venezuela solidly. Our record of standing with Venezuela is solid. And where are the communist groups? Where are they? I don't see them, right? I mean, the Workers' World Party is having rallies for Venezuela. That's nice. I'm glad they got around to it finally. I guess there wasn't a big pro-abortion rally this week. There wasn't a big transgender drive out Trump rally this week. So I guess they had to march for Venezuela. Oh dear. But Yeah, it frustrates me. Look, I'll tell you one thing. I just want to tell this story. I told it a couple streams ago, and I want to tell it again because it's really important. So, a couple of years after I left the Workers' World Party, they had a big internal problem, and some stuff got back to me, right, about how they had summed up my leaving the party. And this is what was said about me, as they said, "Oh, we're a party that fights racism. We're a party that fights racism." And, if imagine that, that there was a demonstration, there was a question of, if you could only go to one protest and you had to go to a protest against racism in America, or you would go to a protest about opposing the war in Ukraine, which would you do? Well, our party, we would always go to the protest against racism. But that Caleb guy, he would always do Ukraine because he just doesn't understand how important and anti-racist our party is. That's apparently what was said by Larry Holmes about me. Now, it got back to me, and somebody actually said to me, "Well, Caleb, what would you do if there was you could only go to one rally, and it was a rally against racism, or it was a rally around Ukraine? Which would you do?" And I said, "I don't know. There's no way to know because it would depend on the circumstances. If it was just the same old rally and a bunch of Democrats were going to be there, and the Ukraine crisis nobody was talking about it except for you, the Ukraine won. But if there had just been a horrendous, egregious act of racism and nobody was talking about it, something like the raiding the house of the Uhuru movement, I would say to do that. It just depends on the circumstances." I said it would depend on the circumstances. There's no way you could say which would be more important. You just don't know, right? There could be a situation where an anti-racist struggle would take precedence. There could be a situation where an international struggle would take precedence. You just don't know. But the Workers' World Party would always take the racism issue because they're dumb. And I hate to say that. It's because they're dumb. And it's because they want to be trendy and they want to fit in. And because it's now trendy and hip to protest against racism. So they would always do that because they always took the easy way out. They never wanted to be courageous. They never could explain their politics. The people that were at the top wanted to be Democrats, but they already found a Barack Obama, and they already found a Jesse Jackson, so they were stuck being communists, and it was infuriating to me. They never had the ability. And the time that I left, I will just tell you this: my last straw with them was that it was during the Black Lives Matter uprising, the events of 2015, where we were building anti-racist demonstrations that I was part of. We were organizing very important demonstrations for the People's Power Assembly. And I was part of those demonstrations. And we had a meeting at our office, at the Workers' World office, every Wednesday night. And there were about 80 people coming to the Workers' World Party office because it was a trendy issue. And Black Lives Matter was popular and all that. 2015, Baltimore had just gone up in flames. Obama was still president, getting ready to leave. And every week, the People's Power Assembly would have a meeting at their office. And there were two important Black leaders. I won't say their names here, but they were very important Black leaders in New York City. Both of whom were middle-aged Black men. And one of these middle-aged Black men, he made comments to young women. He'd say, "Oh, that's a nice dress you got on there," and, whatever. And they banned him from the group. And they launched like this crazy cancel culture ban against him that was a little bit nuts. It was a little crazy. And it's like, this guy, okay, don't make comments like that. It's rude. You need to respect women or whatever. But they launched this like crazy campaign against the guy. And that scared us. And then this other older Black man, they went after him in a similar manner. And I don't even know what it was about. It was the fact that I think he wasn't pro-transgender or something like that, or that he talked to police officers at demonstrations. He would talk with the cops at demonstrations. They went after him and they banned him. And I watched these two older Black men get banned from the group. And me and my wife, we both said, we're not going back to these meetings on Wednesday night. We're not going back to these meetings because it's only a matter of time before they come for us. And we could see that it was turning into a circular firing squad. And that there was a certain person, who was a member of the Workers' World at the party at the time, who is completely toxic and he would just target people and go after people. And we thought, this is a circular firing squad. I had a full-time job. I was working with Press TV at the UN, and I was recently married. I'd married the year before, and I was disagreeing with the party, and I had just been in Iran and all that. I'm just like, I just don't even want to go to these meetings anymore. I don't want to do that. So I stopped going to the People's Power Assembly meetings every week. But I wasn't going to quit the party or whatever. I was just whatever. I had my full-time job. I had my disagreements with the party, but I was trying to just kind of step away. So then I got a phone call. And, it was like at 8 a.m. We're having an emergency meeting of the local committee or whatever. We need you to be there, Caleb. I said, I'm busy. I got to work today. I can't. No. It's an emergency meeting. We got to have this meeting. I thought, okay, all right, I'll go to the meeting. So it's 10 a.m. I go to the office. I'm there at 10 a.m. I've got work later that day and all this. I'm sitting there with them. What is this emergency meeting about? It's about the fact, Caleb, every week, 80 people come to our office, 80 young people that are organizing Black Lives Matter rallies come to our office, but not a single one of them has joined the party. Why? Why have they not joined the party? They all know about it. They see the newspaper that we hand out. They don't join the party. That's what the meeting was about. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh God, don't do this to me. And so they're just going around and why did none of them join? We haven't recruited a single one of these young Black activists who come to our office. Not a single one of the anti-racist white youth. None of them have joined the Workers' World Party. Why? Why are we not recruiting them? Then they turned to me. They said, Caleb, you are the only young person here, which was true. I was the only person in the room under 60. Caleb, why are we not recruiting any of these young people? Pointed at me. And at that point, they asked for it. And so I told them, I said, we're not recruiting them because they don't agree with us. We're an organization that supports North Korea. We're an organization that believes in Marxism-Leninism. We're an organization that, believes in, communist ideology. And these young people are coming to our office because they like Barack Obama and they think racism is bad. And if you want these young people to join our group, you need to convince them to like North Korea. You need to convince them to like communism and ideology. People don't join a communist organization that likes North Korea, a communist organization that, supports Iran, a communist organization that, that defended the Soviet Union. People don't join such a group because they think protesting is fun and cool. They just don't, right? If they think protesting is fun and cool, they can join the Democrats. They can join all kinds of groups. We have a little bit of a problem in that we are representing an ideology that most people think is evil and totalitarian and failed and starved everyone everywhere it's ever been tried. And if you can't give these people real political answers about why our ideology is correct, they're not going to join this group. I felt like that should be fucking common sense. And there was dead silence in the room after I said that. And I didn't use profanity. I actually was quite respectful in how I said it. And as I left the office, a number of the older folks walked up to me and whispered to me, wow, you were so right in what you said. And, that was very brave of you to say that. So what happened? Well, my phone rang that night. You fucking piece of shit. You think you can talk down to us? You think you're smarter than all of us? You can, I got chewed off and I thought, you know what? Fuck these people. I'm done with this shit. I'm done with this. I'm done with this. Look, it infuriated me. It absolutely, and it was just like, what I said there was common sense, but the people that run that party don't believe in communism. They just don't, right? They don't believe in communism. They just want to be liberal activists, right? And this is a big fucking problem. And it's very weird in America, but all the communist groups are led by non-communists. Interesting, isn't it? Why would one be the leader of a communist group if one has never read Lenin and one is not interested in communism? But I was talking to one of our friends from Australia, and he said they have the exact same problem in Australia. It's very weird. The Communist Party of Australia, some out of the blue, they just find these people to be in charge of it, and you talk to them, and they've never read Lenin, and they can't make coherent arguments. It's a really weird thing, and it's a little bit of a problem. And, I didn't need them at that point. I had taken it. You don't know how many times there was this whole process in the group where they would they would accuse you of something and then go after you, right? They would accuse you of this or that, if you were undermining, don't you have faith in our leadership? And they would go at, it was like part of how they like got you to be obedient, as they had this culture of abuse, basically, where, they would accuse you of being racist, or they would accuse you of not respecting the leaders or whatever. And I put up with that shit for 8 years. And I got to the point, I had a full-time job being an anti-imperialist. I was getting flown to Iran. I was getting flown to Venezuela. I was getting flown to Brazil to give speeches. And I could see that their understanding of the world didn't fit, that socialism has changed, right? And I could see that the leaders of the group didn't really believe in communism. They were just protest hustlers, just liberal protest hustlers. And, it just got to the point that, and I tried to just step away and be like, oh yeah, I'm a member, but I'm just doing my own thing. But then as soon as I stepped away, immediately they started, he's a white supremacist, he's a neo-Nazi. They told people I'd converted to Islam, which was not true. They told people I'd converted to Mormonism, which was not true. They had told people I was a white nationalist, which was not true. They told people all kinds of crap, right? And they lied to people. All kinds of people from around the country came to me and told me what they were being told about me. They were basically just trying to scare all the young people in the group away from associating with me. It was pretty awful, and it pisses me off, and the sad thing is the Workers' World Party was once a very serious, strong organization. It deteriorated into a protest hustle, and that's what it is. And the same for PSL, and the same for the other breakaways. They're protest hustles. That's what they are. They've learned a way that they can raise money by having protests, and they are anti-imperialist, and their politics made sense in the 1970s, right? In the 1970s, their politics made sense. Angela Davis, a black woman associated with the Black Panthers, black freedom fighter, was the main face of the Soviet Union in America. And black radicalism and the movement and hippies and anti-imperialist governments lined up. They don't anymore. Anti-imperialist governments are quite socially conservative. Meanwhile, the bulk of the American people are mad that their living standards are going down and oppose the wars. And these people have no answer to them. They think the bulk of the American people are a bunch of evil racists. They don't want to organize them. They just want to do whatever the liberals are doing and, insert support for North Korea into that somehow. It's pathetic. They're a relic of a different time. They're anti-populist when it really gets down to it. They're anti-populist, and it's the spirit of the ghetto, the spirit of the ghetto, the spirit of the ghetto. And I was never really trusted in that organization because I am white and I am not of a certain ethnicity. And, that sounds like an awful thing to say, but it's true, right? That there is a certain ethnic group that maybe they don't even support Israel, but they still have this belief that Christians are all in the Ku Klux Klan and that people in Ohio. I was told by a leader of the Workers' World Party that everyone in Ohio, the state I'm from, believes that Jews are born with horns and tails. That's what I was told, right? That's what I was told, right? That every person in Ohio, everyone in the state believes that Jews are born with horns and tails. I have never met anyone in my life who is dumb enough to think Jews are born with horns and tails. But that's what we all think, because deep down, all white Christians, especially rural people, especially people from red states, we're all Ku Klux Klan, white supremacist, neo-Nazi. I think them Jews are born with horns and tails. That's why I'm going to kill them just like Hitler. That's what they think. That's what they think. When I first moved to New York, they'd all say to me, Caleb, we love your accent. I'd be like, what accent? I don't have an accent. I just talk in a normal American voice, but I don't talk like this. I don't talk. I don't talk about the capitalists and the Vikings. I'm not one of them, and, it is the spirit of the ghetto. It's the result of years of persecution. I mean, look, the Holocaust, that was pretty awful. The pogroms and all that, they come by it honestly, okay? But there is an element of ethnic bigotry of these people. They might say they love the working class and all of that. They don't, right? They think the working class of America are all white supremacist neo-Nazis or whatever. And that's what they think, right? And that, they especially, they get triggered by anything associated with Christianity, and they're anti-Israel, but, right? They're anti-Israel, but there's always a but. And I was accused of anti-Semitism. When I came back from Iran, I gave a speech and they video recorded it and they refused to put it online and they accused me of anti-Semitism. And we discussed it. The anti-Semitism that they accused me of was that I said that Israel was a gentrification project, right? It was a group of white Europeans who'd gone there and driven the people out. I said it was like gentrification. And they told me, I was told that Israel was not a gentrification project because the Jews had nowhere else to go. Seriously, now, is that not Zionism? Is that not Zionism? But, you can't call Israel a gentrification project because the Jews had nowhere else to go, Caleb. And they didn't even know they were going to Israel. And that's Zionism. That's fucking Zionism, right? And it's not true. It's not true. There plenty of Jews went to New York City. But you can't say Israel's a gentrification project. The Israelis are victims, I was told. The Israelis are victims. They're victims, apparently, right? It's U.S. imperialism just uses them. Israel's just a tool of U.S. imperialism. Zionism is just a made up thing that the U.S. imperialists are using to oppress the Arabs. But the Jews, the Israelis, they're the victims of U.S. imperialism. Bull honking. And you know what? If that's the case, well, the Ku Klux Klan, they're just victims, right? They're not actually racist, right? They're just being used by the capitalists to oppress the black people. They would never say that now, would they? They would never make that argument. Of course not. They would never say that. No, the Klan are the enemy. We're going to kill them. Oh, okay. So I guess if your people have a racist ideology that is used to justify imperialism, they're just poor victims. But if my people have a racist ideology that's used to oppress, victims, that's because they're evil and they need to be all murdered. This is their attitude, right? And there's an ethnic component to it. And I understand Lyndon LaRouche is not an anti-Semite in any way. Lyndon LaRouche is just he comes out of the Marxist tradition. But he tried to be a Marxist in New York City in the late 60s, and they did the same thing to Lyndon LaRouche that they did to me. You're not allowed to be a Marxist, right? It's their property. Marxism is their hustle, right? It's their way it's their little, and that's why it's always going to remain fringe and irrelevant. In Venezuela, they have a real mass communist movement because it is a mass movement of Venezuelan people fighting against imperialism. In Russia, they had a real revolutionary movement led by a guy named Joe Stalin, who was trained in a seminary, and they built a real mass movement and established the Soviet Union. In China, they had a real mass movement. But in America, communism is never going to be a real mass movement because it is the property of certain people, and it is their private property, and they're going to be in charge of it until the end, and they hate the American people, and the American people are all evil in their minds. They hate the American people, and America is just an evil, racist country, and they're the good ones, and, so as a result, communism in America is a dead brand. And that's why we have to build innovationism. We have to build the innovationist movement because communism in America is a dead brand because it's the property of certain forces that it's a form of, it's dominated by crypto Zionists, not straight up Zionists who support Israel, but crypto Zionists who have that mindset that puts them at odds with the American people. And this is all not politically correct. And I expect someday they're going to cancel me for saying this. And it's funny because after I was in the Workers' World Party, the big talking point against me was that I was an anti-Semite. Nobody ever brings that up anymore. It's pretty funny, isn't it? Right? No one ever brings that up anymore. No one ever accuses me of anti-Semitism because now, with what Israel's been doing and how they call everyone an anti-Semite, it wouldn't work. It's kind of interesting. But for years, that was the main thing that got up. Oh, Caleb is an anti-Semite. And now they don't say that anymore because everyone can see how toxic Zionism is. Opposing what Israel does is the main thing that leftists do. And, and so now, it doesn't get brought up anymore. But for a long time, that was the talking point against me. I don't hate Jews. I've got stacks of books by Jewish Marxists behind me and all of that. But there is just a level of ethnic bigotry among people that run communist groups in America. And, and I'm not saying it doesn't come from a real place of suffering. It comes from their real experience of being persecuted, but it's not universal. Look at Norman Finkelstein, right? Look at Max Blumenthal, right? There are plenty of folks of Jewish descent who said, you know what? I may be of Jewish descent, but I'm not better than everybody else, right? I'm not going to maintain this victim complex that says the American people are my enemy. There's plenty of Jewish folks who do that. So we're not hating anyone on the basis of their religion. We're not hating anyone on the basis of their ethnicity, but there's a big problem in communism in America, and that's why communism remains fringe. I mean, it's just because it's captured by the spirit of the ghetto. And wokeism is largely the spirit of the ghetto, right? Wokeism is largely the spirit of the ghetto, right? It is anti-populism, and it is anti-human. And the ultimate expression of the spirit of the ghetto is neoconservatism. That's what my book, Trotsky and the Neoconservatives, is about. Trotsky was not a Zionist. He was not a neoconservative, but he was a Marxist in Russia who had the spirit of the ghetto. He hated the Russian people. He hated the Russian peasantry. And when Marxism in Russia became dominated by Stalin, who was building a mass movement of Russian workers and peasants and raised the country up, Trotsky was like, no, I want permanent revolution. I want to wage war against European civilization and permanent revolution. And Stalin said, no, we're going to build a strong country here in Russia. We're going to raise people up. And so they didn't agree. And so Trotsky went to the West and he collaborated with the Nazis. And then he ultimately, his followers became the neocons. And neoconservatism and Trotskyism, they share anti-populism, this belief that the people are the enemy. They share this belief that there's already a book about the spirit of the ghetto, Rose. It's called Trotsky and the Neocons. That's this book, right? That's what this book is all about. And you will understand the continuity between Leon Trotsky and John Bolton. It is they hate the people. The people are the enemy. The people are the enemy, and they want global instability and chaos in the name of destroying populist movements, right? The neocons, if you read what Leo Strauss wrote, the neocons viewed Nazi Germany as the result of excessive democracy, which is crazy, right? Nazi Germany was not democratic. Hitler never won a majority of the vote. Regardless, they believed that Nazi Germany was too democratic, that average Germans deep down in their souls just wanted Nazism, wanted authoritarianism. And they believe the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany are the same thing. They are an expression of totalitarian mass movements. And that the job of the West is to clear out and destroy totalitarian mass movements to ensure that that the great ones, the superior ones, can always rise to the top. That's what Leo Strauss believes. That's what he wrote in this book, Persecution and the Art of Writing, right? He argues that all the great philosophers of history have had to write in code because the masses would persecute them if they found out what they really thought. And he argues that some people are just the natural superiors. They are the philosopher kings in the Platonic sense, right? That's what they believe. That's what neoconservatism, when it really gets down to it, if you read Irving Kristol, if you read Leo Strauss, that's what they believe. They're elitists. That's the neoconservative worldview. And they believe in the noble lie. They believe it's okay to lie to people. It's okay to manipulate people because average people just can't handle the truth, right? That's what they believe. And that Leo Strauss, this guy, his favorite television show was Gunsmoke because the good guy was all good and he wore a white hat. And the bad guy was all bad and he wore a black hat. And it's that simple. It's that simple, right? It's not complicated. And he said that's how average people should understand foreign policy. Is they should think it's Gunsmoke, right? And that's what they should think it is. That's largely how the United States has been run. But we're at the point that the average people are sick and tired of their living standards going down. They're sick and tired of their wages and et cetera, and they want to fight back and they want to resist. And, we are going to build mass movements. Populism is not a dirty word. Populist movements are a good thing, right? Now, obviously, you can have demagogy. You can have people being rallied to do bad things, but populism is generally a good thing. And my book, Khrushchevism, gets into this as well, right? Khrushchevism is about this same kind of issue. Right. I sent a $50 question today. It's been charged in receipt. You didn't see it? No, I did not see a $50 question. Blug GoPro. I'm strolling. Wow. You sent a $50 question. I see Penny's question about suing gun owners. I see Leo Messi's question. I do not see your question. Blog GoPro. You should demand your money back. I saw your two questions last time, which I answered. That's infuriating. You sent a $50 question and it was blocked. That's crazy. No, I do not see it. Blog GoPro, I do not see that your question. It's not there. I'm scrolling up. I don't see it. Where is it? I do not see it. If you want to say, you want to restate the question, it doesn't have to be a super chat. I will answer it right now, but it's not there. Blog GoPro, and I would be happy to answer your question. I just don't see it. It's not there. So yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that your question didn't go through, but if you want to send it, if you want to restate it, I will answer it. I will answer it. That's crazy. Rumble is blocking $50 questions. That's insane. But restate your question if you're watching Blog GoPro. Restate your question. I don't see it on Rumble. It's not there. I don't see it, right? I see. You can restate it though. Please restate it. I don't see it, right? I see a question from Penny. I see Leo Messi. I see Leo Messi again. I see Penny. I see Leo Messi. I see you asking about your question, but I don't see the actual question. It's not there. It's not on the Rumble. So yeah, I mean, feel free to restate your question, or you can, email me. My email is just calebmaupin@gmail. If you want to send it again, you can just email it to me and I can answer it in the next stream. Is this your question? Is this your question? You're just asking it on YouTube? Is that your question? Is the Marxist mode of production heterogeneous? All right, I'm going to have to look up that word, first of all. I saw it earlier. They expire after some time. Well, I'm really sorry to hear that. Okay, so we'll answer this. First of all, I got to learn a new word, right? Is the Marxist mode of production heteronomous? Heteronomous, right? What does that mean? Acting in accordance with one's desires rather than reason or moral law, due to its goal of unlimited abundance. Must autonomy break from historical materialism via self-limitation and ecological finitude? All right, well, first of all, Socrates dancing, there's no Marxist mode of production, all right? There's no Marxist mode of production. Marxism is an understanding of how history works, an understanding of the way the world works. It expresses itself in terms of philosophy, in terms of dialectical materialism. It expresses itself in terms of economics, in terms of historical materialism. It expresses itself as the communist political movement. It expresses itself with an understanding of the economic laws of the capitalist system. That's Marxism, right? And I've strayed from Marxism in a lot of ways. But Marxism argues that history goes through various modes of production out of necessity. At first, there was hunter-gatherer civilization. We got too good at hunting and gathering. We had our first ecological crisis, so we had to start growing our own food. And with the origin of agriculture and the origin of private property in the state, we had slavery. Out of slavery emerged feudalism, which is much more efficient. Out of feudalism emerged capitalism. And the idea is that capitalism eventually will give way to socialism. And socialism is when the economy, the industrial economy of capitalism, that is so advanced, becomes rationally organized, right? Engels compares socialism to the Voltaire arc, right? You have lightning, you have static electricity, but then if you take electricity, all that energy that's just out there, and you concentrate it and you organize it, it's much more powerful, right? And that it's taking all of that industrial development of capitalism, but having a rationally organized economy, rationally organizing it, centralizing the means of production so that it can become concentrated, it can raise the productive forces. And so you create a huge advance in technology, because no longer do people get poorer because of technological advancement. No longer are people hungry because there are too many houses. No longer are people homeless because there's too much food. And as a result, the level of wealth in society increases and increases and increases. And the goal is that eventually you build a world of so much abundance and so much technological advancement that people only have to work because they feel like it. Labor becomes life's prime want. And that there's no need for a state. Everyone's pretty much equal because there's so much abundance, right? That's the idea. So what you're asking is this system, this way of doing things, right? Is this way of doing things is it heteronomous in that people are working in their own economic interest? Well, that is one of the central understandings of Marxism, is that people work out of their own economic interest and that people are motivated by their own economic needs, right? And that is something that a lot of the critics of Marxism raise, right? And that it's the point of historical inevitability, right? That people will inevitably, it'll be in their economic interest to rise up and centralize the means of production, just like it was in economic interest of the mercantile classes to overthrow feudalism, just like it was in the economic interest of people to organize agriculture and move away from hunter-gatherer civilization. Is that people act out of their basic economic interests, and that if you look at the historical materialist narrative of history, there's very little role for the human will. It all just kind of naturally happens. Okay, and that is a very common critique of Marxism. Marx and Engels wrote about this. And there's even a book by Plekhanov called The Role of the Individual in History. But a central point of Marxism is this belief that people just do what is in their economic interest. Okay, that's like a central belief of the Marxist ideology, is people act in their own central economic interest. So if you think that is heteronomous, right, that people just do what is in their economic interest, in the classical Marxist worldview, that is the truth. Now, as someone who is somewhat critical, as someone who doesn't totally accept dialectical materialism and argues that there is spiritual power and that people do have the ability to work against their own economic interests, I would say that's what puts me slightly at odds, right? I really like the book Heroes, Heroism, and the Heroic in History by Thomas Carlyle. And that book is largely a book that Marxists critiqued. In the book by Plekhanov, the role of the individual in history, that book is largely a critique of the work of Thomas Carlyle. But ultimately, Marxism, as an economic and historical materialist worldview, does view people as working in their own economic interest. Now, the self-limitation and ecological finite point, I don't agree with that at all. I believe scarcity and the idea of limited resources is a lie, and I'll tell you why. Because if we were still doing what people did in the 1400s and burning wood to heat our homes, this planet would have lost all its trees a long time ago, and we would have run out of wood. But we don't do that anymore. We burn fossil fuels, coal, natural gas. We have electrical heating. Right? There was a book published in the 70s called Limits to Growth, and it said that we were going to run out of oil by 1990. And we haven't run out of oil. Why? If we were still acquiring oil in the same way we acquired it in the 1990s, we would have run out of oil. But we invented deep sea drilling. We invented hydraulic fracking. We discovered new oil deposits. And now, actually, we have oil for at least the next 70 years at this point, right? And so, there are minerals in Africa, in the mountains, that used to be completely worthless, that are now very, very valuable because of computer technology, and they're used in computer chips. There are all these rare earth elements that the U.S. government's really mad that China has. Well, China grabbed them because they used to not be valuable, but then electronic car batteries made them valuable. The way we interact with our environment is always changing. Yes, we are on a finite planet. There's only so much here. But the way we use what's here is constantly changing. We're constantly going to a more efficient way of doing things, number one. And number two, who's to say that we can only acquire resources from this planet? We have sent many probes to Mars. China has already acquired elements like helium-3 from the moon that they're using for fusion energy research. Why are you limiting man's capacity to acquire resources from this planet, number one? And why are you not taking into account that we are constantly reinventing the way we work with the resources that we already have, right? I do not accept limited resources, right? I just don't accept it, right? I just don't. And that limited resources is a Malthusian lie, right? It is used to instill pessimism in us, to promote the concept of overpopulation, to promote the concept of degrowth. And I just don't accept any concept of overpopulation. We need to use our resources strategically. We need to use them in a long-term and sustainable way. But the idea that growth is somehow bad, or that we're just going to run out of planet, anyone who talks that way is trying to kill you. That is the ideology of genocide. If the earth is only this, if the pie is only this big, the only way your share gets any bigger is by cutting into someone else's. And no one ever thinks their slice of the pie is big enough. And that's what leads to genocide and wars and all kinds of backwardness. The pie is unlimited. There is no limit to growth and human progress. Human beings are an amazing creature that is constantly moving toward a higher plane and a higher state of abundance. And so I do not accept that. There is no limit to growth, and that anyone who tries to tell you there's a limit to growth is trying to kill you, right? It is the nature of mankind to constantly be moving toward a higher state, toward a higher plane, right? And that it is fundamentally anti-human, and it is satanic to promote the idea that growth is somehow bad, that human beings are a cancer on the planet, that we've gone too far with civilization. And I would encourage you, it's spiritually bad for you to believe that. And are largely the people who disagree with me, if you really press them, that's what they're upset about. It's a spiritual disagreement. They want to be pessimistic. They want to hate their fellow man. They want to be hopeless. They want to be vengeful and rageful. They don't want to be optimistic. And so many of the people who argue with me, that is really what it's about. They are triggered by the fact that I believe in humanity, that I have love in my heart, and I believe in humanity and our ability to rise to a higher plane, right? And that is a belief that I fundamentally accept. And that is what people are triggered by, because our society has on blast a pessimistic message constantly everywhere. Nope, we've gone too far. There is no hope. It's everywhere. And it's a good place to hide, because if there is no hope, there's no responsibility, right? If you were always going to fail the test, there's no reason to study. But if you might fail the test, but you might get a good grade, then you have to study, because you might actually get a good grade. So it's easy to just say, oh, I'm going to fail the test no matter what. And then you have no responsibility. And that's the problem. Pessimism is a great place to hide. It's a great place to hide, but who ultimately benefits from pessimism is the people that are already in power, the elite. They're the ones who benefit from it the most, because they're already at the top. And so if everyone stops growing, they stay at the top forever. And that's why the British Empire and the Rockefellers have promoted Malthusianism like crazy. They're already at the top. And so now that we're at the top, game over, and we'll just degrow and make sure the world stays as is, with us always at the top. And that's why they can't allow Russia and China to rise up. And that's why they want to drive down living standards. And that's why they won't allow China to build power plants in Africa. And that's why they're furious to see Russia team up with countries in Africa to develop their mining resources. They want humanity to stop. That's why they hate Ibrahim Traore. That's why they hate Maduro. That's why they hate the Islamic Revolution of Iran. And that's why they hate you, right? They want to stop human progress so they can stay at the top indefinitely. But humanity will break free. Humanity will march forward. And this is innovationism. This is the understanding of innovationism, the innovationist perspective. There is no limit to human creativity. There is no limit to growth. And that the irrationality of capitalism and the globalist imperialist world order will be overcome by the human spirit and optimism marching forward. That is the innovationist perspective. And it takes the best from Marxism and it applies it to the crisis of our time. The fight in our time is the fight between growth and degrowth. The monopolies, the big monopolies that don't want growth, and the anti-monopoly coalition that is emerging around the globe of working class people, of small business owners, of anti-imperialist states that emerged from anti-colonial revolutions, all who want growth and expansion, right? The global anti-monopoly coalition, the global axis of resistance, the global struggle against globalism and imperialism, humanity breaking free from the artificial restraints of the dying world order, that is the hope for the future. And this is rooted in the traditional Marxist worldview, but it's taking it up to date. So I hope that analysis that I gave is helpful. I do want to see the rest of the question. And you did ask a follow-up, right? Wow, you just hit me with like 3 questions there. Boom, boom, boom. You said last time you need abundance for post-colonial success. That's why I use the term. That's not exactly what I said. You're misunderstanding the point. What I'm saying is that the way to get to a world without a state and without oppression and a world of equality is abundance. And what the countries that break out of colonialism are striving to do. What did Stalin do in the Soviet Union? He had 5-year plans, and he built power plants, and he built steel mills. What did China do? They lifted their country up. What is it that Gaddafi did in Libya, right? He created a country with the highest life expectancy in Africa. He built the Great Man-Made River. All the anti-colonial struggles are struggles to have growth. That's what they're doing, right? And the ultimate goal, if we're going to have a world that is stateless and classless and a world of equality, the only way to have it is abundance. And that anti-colonialism is the struggle for growth. That is my point. Now, Blog Grow Pro says, I've been to China. I see an entire highway of building, been at the same time on the horizon. It was scary. Abundance felt hyper-capitalism, not communism at all. Well, that's, again, the critique of capitalism is not stuff, right? And that, if you're opposed to growth, that's not anti-capitalism. That's Malthusianism. The critique of capitalism, go read the Communist Manifesto. At no point does Marx ever say, there's too much stuff and having stuff is bad. I was taught my whole life, capitalism means having money and having stuff, and communists want everyone to be poor because they're more morally pure. That's bullshit. And the people who believe that are woke leftists. But what did Stalin do? Stalin built 5-year plans and power plants so that Russians could have more stuff. What does the Chinese Communist Party do? They've raised China up so they can have more stuff, right? Raising people up out of poverty, building power plants, building irrigation systems like Gaddafi did. That is what anti-colonialism is about. If you're against people having stuff, you're not anti-capitalist. You are a pessimist. You are a Malthusian. The opposition to having stuff has nothing to do with anti-capitalism, right? Maybe you want to use stuff more efficiently, get rid of planned obsolescence, maybe be strategic in how we use our resources. But the idea that you saw all this building in China and that you didn't like that, well, that's not in line with any Marxist or historical materialist critique of capitalism. Max Stirner, self-interest, and Marxist communist communism, any link. How about MAGA communist? Does it hold? Okay, so Stirner wrote a book called The Ego in Its Own, and he was kind of an anarchist thinker who emphasized, individualism and stuff. And I am not as familiar with his work. I know it's popular on the alt-right. MAGA communism, I invented MAGA communism, but I was just never stupid enough to call it MAGA communism, right? MAGA communism, basically, I was the one who wrote the book and said, we need to build a movement that reaches out to people in the MAGA movement who are opposed to the FBI, who are opposed to the pandemic lockdowns, etc. And I wrote the book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. And I invented that. But I was smart enough to go, we're not going to call it MAGA communism, because everyone who's MAGA hates communism, and everyone who's a communist hates MAGA, and it's the most stupid niche thing ever. I invented it, and 2 jokers came along, 2 frauds who worked with the FBI against me, most likely. 2 frauds and con men appeared on the internet, and they did a very bad imitation of what I've done and what I've pioneered. And they worked with the FBI to smear and defame me. And then they created a situation that weakened me or whatever for a little bit. And then while they did that, they announced, we're MAGA communists. And they gave some of the dumbest interviews that I have ever seen. And they have no fucking clue what they're talking about. Yeah, man, like, I'm a communist, and like, I could rant about this all night, and I don't want to talk about it too much, but it's like, one of these interviews, the interviewer's like, well, I know you're a good person. You're not a communist. He's like, actually, I am a communist, man. Yeah, like, totally, dude. Like, they have no fucking clue what they're talking about. And they're frauds and they're con men. And there's a reason the Israeli government tweets them out and tweets April Fool's jokes about them. And there's a reason that they have gone after me viciously, right? I was just telling somebody today, they called up, well, never mind. Anyway, we're going to stop talking about that, right? But MAGA communism is not real. It never was. But I invented what you might call MAGA communism, and a stupid, cringe, made for social media brand imitating what I did in the most childish, adolescent, juvenile way, emerged and called itself MAGA communism. And now they're trying to be regular leftists. That's all that happened. Can AI regulate degrowth? Does it inherently drive economic growth? I mean, in theory, right? If one tried to impose degrowth, one could use an AI algorithm to impose it. I don't see why not. I don't think that's a good thing. I'm opposed to degrowth, but AI could be used to set up some kind of degrowth model. But AI itself is not degrowth. And the degrowth crowd, they engage in a lot of moving the goalposts. Degrowth is one of these sacred cows. It drives me crazy. If you're an internet leftist, if you're a leftist who's brainwashed by social media, there's all kinds of things that you have to be for, right? You have to be for land back. You have to be for degrowth. And you have to be for abolish the police. Now, what do any of those things mean? What does land back mean, right? It is true. This land that we're living on used to belong to Native Americans. So should all white people immediately leave America? No, that's just not realistic. There are people who argue that. And in 2017, when the West Virginia teachers strike happened, the local Workers' World Party branch actually made a meme that said the teachers were on stolen land and they should pay reparations instead of going on strike. And then they put out one settler, one bullet. So it does happen that there are people that just think, no, we should all just leave North America. However, sometimes land back means, means all white people leave North America. Sometimes land back means something I totally agree with, which is indigenous people should have a right to their own territory and should receive some reparations for what's been done to them. I agree with that. Sometimes land back is a program in Canada to privatize government land and build luxury housing with a company tied in with George Soros. It depends what it is. And you're not supposed to ask what it is. It's just land back. And if you're against it, you must be like a Nazi. And they can never tell you what it is, but they just know it's bad, right? So, if land back, and the same with abolish the police. Abolish the police is not a sensible policy. Most people say abolish the police. Oh, really? So there's a pedophile in my neighborhood and we just let him go, right? And, abolish the police. Oh, okay. There's people speeding on the highway and no one stops them because most people, it sounds nuts. Well, and if you press the abolish the police people, what they really mean is, well, we want to set up a police force that is in line with our woke revolutionary values. Well, then you're not abolishing the police. You're just creating new police. Why don't you say that? We want a new state. We want a revolutionary working class state. That's just old-fashioned communism. Why don't you call it that? Why are you like abolish the police? Abolish the police sounds dumb to most human beings. And if you actually explain it, it's not abolish the police. It's create police that are in line with our values, right? Create community organizations that engage in policing, whatever. So why don't they say that? Well, because it's this mind fuck of abolish the police. What? You don't want to abolish the police. You're a fascist. It's like they invent some phrase and we're just supposed to believe it. Degrowth is the same thing. Degrowth is bad. If someone tells you economic growth is bad, they are trying to kill you. It is spiritually bad for you. It is the basis of Malthusianism. It is the basis of genocide. It is, for all the reasons I just explained, it's bad. Degrowth is bad. However, as soon as you say degrowth is bad, Jason Hickel or one of these jokers says, degrowth just means working from home. You're against working from home? Well, my friend, degrowth is not working from home. If we advance technology to the point that I can do my job without getting out of my home, I can actually, in my own home, do my job and accomplish it in the same way and have the same results, but I don't have to actually get up and go to my job. I can do it from my home. That's called growth, my friend. That's technological advancement. That's not degrowth. Degrowth, it just means using solar panels. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. If we're able to have more energy because we use solar panels, in addition to having, regular nuclear power and oil and other stuff, that's not degrowth. I'm not against using solar panels, right? But if you get rid of fusion energy and you get rid of nuclear power and you only use solar panels and we have 25% of the electricity, yeah, that's degrowth. I'm not for that, right? But they always move the goalpost to make degrowth mean benign things. However, the arguments for degrowth are always finite planet, limited resources. It's always Malthusianism. And then they say, oh, but we just want to do these common sense things. Well, none of those things are degrowth. And if finite planet, limited resources is true, we better start committing genocide, right? We better have birthing licenses. We better start exterminating, people, the useless eaters, right? It's all bullshit. Let me tell you something, my friend. Human labor power and human creativity is the source of all wealth. Human beings are not useless eaters. They're not non-productive consumers. Human beings are the source of all wealth. And if you want to have a prosperous society, you need a government that invests in people, invests in communities, helps people be educated, helps people be healthy, helps people have access to healthcare, puts people to work, doing useful work that's productive for society. If you want a strong, prosperous society, you need to invest in people. The myth of non-productive consumers is the foundation of Malthusianism. The idea that there's people out there that all they do is eat. All they do is eat. All they do is consume, and they don't produce. Every human being is capable of producing. But the idea, it's capitalism. It is our irrational economic system and the problem of overproduction and value crisis and the tendency of the falling rate of profit that makes it so there's all kinds of very strong, healthy people who aren't able to contribute to society. Technology makes it more and more efficient to produce goods, and as a result, there's more and more goods that people can't afford to buy. The wages, I'll put on the socialist math video, right? That's the problem. The problem is not that human beings are useless eaters. The problem is we have an irrational economic system that does not utilize human labor power to its productive capacity. That's the problem, is that human beings are very productive. Human beings are very productive. They're very creative, etc. The problem is our economic system, which is very inefficient. Watch.
Explain what needs to be explained, what used to be considered Marxism 101, about why it is that our Western capitalist economy is crashing and burning. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some math. And I hate math. And you know why I hate math? Because I grew up in America. I went to public school in the United States of America, so I am going to, at risk of embarrassing myself, because math was never my best subject, I am going to do some mathematics here on the board for you to explain the problem.
I very much enjoyed Caleb's speech.
So if you are creating a product, right, if you're a factory owner, you're making a product, you are going to need the material through which that product is made, the manufacturing materials. So that'll be A.
The simple equation you put forward to explain the crisis of overproduction and the falling rate of profit.
And you're probably going to need to transport the product to where it's sold. That's B.
It broke down where your money goes.
You're also going to have to pay your labor costs. Labor costs are represented by C.
Explanations of those concepts that people are able to understand.
Then when consumers purchase the product, they're going to pay a final price. And that final price is D. However, there's a problem with that.
I like the fact that he framed it that way to make it very clear.
Which is that the capitalist can't change how much A costs. He can't change how much B costs. So the profit of the capitalist can only be extracted from the value put into it by the worker. And this is the basis of Marxism, the understanding of surplus value.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere. I've never been able to explain it that simply.
So C, the labor value, is divided. You have C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid. And then you have C2, which is the profit that the capitalist makes. And it all adds up to D, which is the final cost of the product. Now, the way people in the United States who talk about Marxism generally talk about this is they say, well, this is unfair. They say the worker is not getting paid the full value of his labor. But they're missing one of the most important points, which is not just that it's unfair and then people argue, well, what about the employer? He put up the money, doesn't he deserve to be? That's all a distraction. Because the important thing to understand is this. C1 is always going to be less than D. The wages paid out to the worker are never enough to buy back the product that he produces. There is always more products created than there are wages paid out to the worker. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction. And it is always there in the capitalist economy. It never goes away. And they have invented all kinds of crazy mechanisms to try and deal with the problem of overproduction. Part of the reason that the US government has purchased billions and billions of dollars worth of cheese only to bury it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri, is to deal with this problem. It is an ongoing present problem, and it's a problem acknowledged by most capitalist economists. John Maynard Keynes said the problem was underconsumption rather than overproduction, but he was pointing to the same problem. The military-industrial complex in the United States is an effort to deal with this problem, to keep spending going. There's all kinds of mechanisms that they've invented to try and resolve this problem, but it gets worse. What is the capitalist always trying to do? He wants to maximize the amount of profit he makes. And one of the main ways they do that is with what's called labor-saving technology. Get rid of workers and replace workers with machines. As they eliminate workers from the process of production, as there's fewer and fewer workers involved, as machines take the place of workers, the role of C in production decreases. There's a little bit of a problem with that. As C goes down, C2 also goes down, right? As C decreases, C2 also decreases. And as the role of the worker in production is reduced, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes goes down. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Only human labor creates value. And this is something that Adam Smith acknowledged. This is something some of the popes even acknowledge. Human labor creates all value. And so when you reduce the role of human labor in production, the amount of value created decreases, and the ability of the capitalist to extract surplus value also decreases. So this causes the capitalist to have to churn out even more products because he's making less and less of a profit on the overall product. He's making less and less of a percentage, so he has to churn them out. So this problem of the worker never being able to buy back what he produces and more products being created than are necessary, this problem becomes exacerbated. And this points to what is understood to be the deeply irrational nature of the capitalist system.
Yes. So that's the problem with capitalism, is that the more efficient it becomes, the poorer people get. Why would self-driving cars be a bad thing, right? They should be a good thing. But in our irrational economic system, it would lead to mass poverty. So you ask, do you believe Africa deserves deterrence from nuclear power? No. I think Africa should have loads of nuclear power. I think nuclear power is a great thing. And I'm especially fusion, if we could do fusion. Now, right now, we don't have cold fusion, but nuclear weapons, obviously, I'm not a big fan of. But nuclear power, I'm all about it. I'm all about nuclear power. Nuclear power is good. It's efficient. There's nothing wrong with nuclear power. The anti-nuclear movement came from big oil, and it was largely a degrowth movement. And that was like the beginning of the left just completely collapsing, was the anti-nuclear movement. So yeah, I have no problem with African countries. I think they should have nuclear power. Absolutely. You made my night. Thank you. I'm born Caucasian Canadian that retired by delegation in Sierra Leone. Own a huge tribal village mansion, trying a end of life, slightly post-colonial with many children. Well, hey, we got to do what we can, man. Africa is the future. Africa is going to grow and expand. And actually, that's one of the predictions that Gaddafi made in the Green Book. He said, Africa will prevail, and Africa is the future. And, look, this world is full of hardship and injustice. And you mentioned on a previous thing that you were raising your kids in a way that was, that was unschooling and more gentle and all of that. I'm all about that. I'm all about, children being brought up to have confidence in themselves and not being degraded in the common ways that it's done, not having their confidence stripped away and being encouraged to be creative and all of that. So, good for you. And I hope that my remarks tonight, these are issues that get me very fired up, but I hope that you didn't take any of it personally, right? And I do respect you as somebody who's, I guess you're in the African continent building some kind of anti-colonial movement and raising children in a way that is caring and helpful. I'm not your enemy, my friend. But I just tell you that I take these ideas very seriously, and I see a lot of things floating around now that are very, very contrary to what I've spent my life learning and understanding. And so I get a little fired up, but, sounds like you're doing amazing work. And I hope that my insights tonight were helpful. And I hope that, you can at least understand my worldview, even if we don't agree. So thank you for engaging me, Blog GoPro, and I do appreciate it. That's quite a bit of engagement here tonight. So I don't know what happened to your first question, but I'm glad you spoke up so that I could address it. And then you had all those follow-up questions, and I appreciate that as well. On that note, folks, I am going to end tonight's stream. I'm going to put on the closing music. One last reminder to register for our event in New Jersey. It's going to be important. It's going to be a great, great event in New Jersey. We've had some very interesting registrations. Let me put it that way. It's going to be a great event in New Jersey. So register for it. If you haven't registered, we'd like to see you there. Yeah, it's going to be great. So be there. It's going to be awesome. Join the Center for Political Innovation. We're doing amazing stuff. We've had some new memberships in the last couple days. Very exciting. And new people. We had a new person on our weekly Zoom call that we did on Saturday. And we're growing as a group. So we want you involved. Join the innovationist movement. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Join innovationism. All right, I'm going to put on the closing music. Thanks, everybody. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.